I'm a security guard at Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51, Testing the Knife. Scene rubbed his chin with his hand, staring at Odin in front of him with subtle eyes. You have been looking at me like this since you came here just now, and you have been looking at me for so long. Is there any problem? Odin stood on the terrace and looked at the Asgardians who were training below. You let him go on purpose, didn't you? Scene stopped staring at Odin. He walked to Odin and asked directly, but his tone was affirmative. Hearing Scene's question, Odin did not ask who he was talking about, but just let out a long breath. If I can't give him what he wants, do I have to trap him here and let him watch what he wants be obtained by others? Odin's tone was filled with a trace of confusion and guilt. At this moment, Scene really felt that Odin was an old man in his twilight years. Let's not talk about this. Let's talk about your new weapon. Odin's scattered divine thoughts were quickly retracted, and the topic changed. My old friend Etri. Oh, the Dwarf King has sent your weapon here, but Loki was in charge of everything in Asgard at the time, so it has been kept in my treasure house. Today, I just want to give it to you. Odin waved his hand, and several Asgardian guards came over with a big box. It was made so quickly. Scene couldn't believe it, but thinking about the process of making Thor's Stormbreaker, it was indeed fast. Odin smiled and explained, it mainly took some time and effort to make the mold. After all, the shape of the weapon you want is very strange. After the Asgardian guard put down the box and left, Odin walked up and motioned to Scene to open it himself. Scene also wanted to see what the dwarves could make this weapon into, so he reached out and opened the lid on the box. The wide sword body was double-edged, exuding a sharp breath, and along the sword body, two branches suddenly split and hooked up to both sides. Odin looked at the sword that seemed a bit out of place to him and introduced it. This sword is made of the unknown metal left over from the creation of the Destroyer, combined with the Uru metal of Asgard. I told Etri about the eternal fire in your body, and he said that this can be used. Scene gently stroked the weapon in front of him, and the weapon also made a slight hum. Really? How to use it? Also, this is not a big sword, it is a 3-pointed two-edged sword. As Scene's voice fell, he picked up the 3-pointed two-edged sword with one hand. Odin said he didn't know. After all, when the weapon was delivered, he fell into a long sleep, so he asked Scene to try it himself. Scene held the short-handled 3-pointed two-edged sword like a big sword in one hand, and the eternal fire in his body began to flow slowly. As the eternal fire climbed up the 3-pointed two-edged sword along Scene's hand, it split into two. One part went to the handle of the sword, causing the handle to begin to stretch, and the other part went up to the blade. There was originally a diamond-shaped gap where the blade branched out on the blade, and Scene's eternal fire flowed into it along the blade to gradually fill it up. Seeing the changes in the 3-pointed two-edged sword, Odin's eyes lit up. The Asgardians who were training below the terrace were gradually attracted by the movements of Scene and his team. Father Thor happened to bring Fandral and others to report on Loki. No trace of Loki was found. Forget it, let him go. Odin waved his hand and signaled them to stand up. Thor wanted to say something after hearing Odin's words, but he didn't say it in the end. Thor and his team naturally noticed the new weapon in Scene's hand. Scene, is this made for you by your father? Thor tilted his head left and right to look at the strange shaped weapon in Scene's hand and asked with a puzzled look, why is it like this? Is this a spear or a long sword? Scene had just activated this weapon with the eternal fire, which was a bit similar to the feeling of dripping blood. To recognize the master in the Oriental fantasy, he could feel that this weapon had a certain spirituality, but he didn't understand it. Yet seeing that Scene did not respond to Thor's words, Volstagg and his friends had the mentality of competing again. They also wanted to see what was special about the weapon made by the God King. Odin forced Scene. Thor, why don't you accompany warrior Scene to try his new weapon? Fandral looked at Thor's eager look and gave him a step. Thor looked back at Fandral with a face full of praise. Brother understands me. What do you think? Scene. Father, Odin said that there was nothing wrong with it. Asgard is a martial arts culture. As long as you pay attention to the degree, it's okay to try. Scene also wanted to understand what functions this three-pointed two-edged sword had. The two walked to the area specially vacated for them under the terrace, surrounded by the cheers of the warlike Asgardians. When the sidelines gradually calmed down, the two stood there. Thor turned his hammer. He knew that Scene was capable of stopping Mjolnir, but his natural warlike factor still drove him to fight Scene. "I'm coming, be careful." Thor's hammer flew towards Scene along with his words. This time Scene did not reach out to stop Mjolnir. Since he said he wanted to try a new weapon, he would use the weapon. Bang. The sound of Mjolnir and the three-pointed two-edged sword colliding kept echoing in everyone's ears. Scene was now holding the short-handled form of the three-pointed two-edged sword with one hand. Just now, he felt like he was playing tennis, but he also felt that the three-pointed two-edged sword was stronger than Mjolnir. Otherwise, if Scene used the blade to hit Mjolnir flying at full speed, the blade would be broken in the endpoint. After catching the counter-attack Mjolnir, Thor began to linger with blue lightning. The moment he raised Mjolnir, the sky was filled with dark clouds. The power of thunder continued to be added to Mjolnir until Thor felt that he had reached the strongest state he could control. With Thor's shouting, Mjolnir released all the thunder power he had just added, targeting Scene on the opposite side. Scene turned the three-pointed two-edged sword into a long handle, and the divine power of the eternal fire flowing on the blade also burst out through the tip of the blade instantly to resist Thor's thunder attack. As the two offensives collided, everyone present except Odin was blown away by the two energy bursts. Odin looked at the ground under their feet after the dust had cleared. Thor's side was charred after being hit by thunder, but Scene's side had not changed at all. Enough, Thor. Seeing that Thor wanted to continue, Odin touched the ground with Gungnir to remind him, "I am amazed at your precise control of energy." Odin turned his head and looked at Scene in admiration. If Odin were to block Thor's attack just now, it would be easy and not a big deal for him, but he still lacked the ability to control his energy as accurately as Scene. It's also due to the weapon bonus. You satisfied with this weapon? It's okay for now, but I don't know what new functions it has. Then, you must remember what you promised me. Don't worry. Chapter 52 Dark Knight Creatures. Naturally, someone will take care of the place after the battle. Scene, did you just use the power of eternal fire? Salty ran forward with his love hammer and asked curiously. Yes, the power of your new weapon is very good, but the shape is a little weird. It is still much worse than my Mjolnir. Thor turned the hammer and showed off proudly. Thor was simply in love with his hammer. I can't put it down, especially after I lost it this time. Scene noticed a problem with his sharp eyes, so he directly grabbed Thor's wrist that turned the hammer. Walter? Thor looked at Scene, who caught him in surprise, and then laughed again. He felt that Scene must also want to appreciate Mjolnir carefully. Is this originally there? Scene stretched out his other hand and pointed at Mjolnir held in Thor's hand. Thor looked down at the position of Scene's finger. There was a scratch on the head of his beloved Mjolnir hammer. Thor's smile suddenly froze. What? How could it be during the competition just now? Fandral looked at the mark and frowned and analyzed. Upon hearing this, Scene immediately raised the three-pointed two-edged knife and stroked the blade, which was still sharp and intact. Scene thought that the blow he had just blocked from Mjolnir seemed to be at a slightly crooked angle, with a bit of a chopping flavor. Could it be true? No, Mjolnir, this. Thor looked at Scene's movements and then looked down at his beloved Mjolnir. Odin on the side became angry when he saw Thor like this. Ever since he gave Mjolnir to him, this guy had become Thor, the hammer god. Without the hammer, he felt like he was nothing. Ahem. Mjolnir is indeed inferior in hardness, but it doesn't matter. Thor heard his father say this, and it really had no influence on Mjolnir. What's more, he proposed the contest himself, so he could only hold his nose and admit it. Everything on Asgard's side was finished, and it came to an end for the time being. Scene opened the portal and returned to New York under Thor's envious eyes. Thor had applied to Odin before. He wanted to go to the atrium with Scene, but Odin sternly refused. Just kidding. There's a lot of things to do later. Who will do it if you run away? In New York, ever since May saw Scene entering Natasha's room that night, she had been unhappy. She had no energy and looked lost. It happened that May's good friend Susan Stone was also having a hard time recently, so the two hit it off and decided to go for a drink together. After May comforted Peter, she received a text message from Susan saying that she was waiting for her downstairs after the two of them took to the street. They originally planned to go shopping first and then go to the bar to have fun, but soon a handsome man who was talkative and humorous took the initiative to strike up a conversation with them. The man named Josh, wearing a well-tailored suit, introduced himself elegantly and claimed that he worked for a large modeling agency. Looking at the business card handed over by Josh, Mary frowned slightly. She didn't know much about this aspect. However, Susan on the side was a little surprised. She knew the name of this modeling agency. Although the main body was in Europe, it was developing well here in New York. The reason why Josh took the initiative to strike up a conversation with Mary and Susan was that he was attracted by their outstanding temperament and charming appearance, and came up with the idea of inviting them to the company to serve as models. As the communication between the three gradually deepened, the topics became more extensive, and Josh learned that Mary and Susan would later go to the bar for entertainment. After a brief thought, Josh's eyes flashed, and he enthusiastically invited them to a bar they had never been to before, swearing that it would definitely be more fun than other places. Susan and Mary thought that they would have fun wherever they went, and the location Josh mentioned was not remote, so there seemed to be no need to worry too much about safety. In this way, the two happily agreed to Josh's invitation. When they arrived at their destination, they discovered that the security measures here were extremely tight and ordinary people could not enter at will. Fortunately, Josh led the way. Susan and Mary followed closely and finally successfully opened the heavy door leading to the colorful nightlife. Dynamic music, swaying bodies, and alcoholic drinks of different colors. Susan had experienced many nightclubs, but she did feel that the atmosphere here was better than those she had been to before. Mary was a little restrained at first, but under Susan's guidance, she couldn't help but sway along. Just after they slowly let go, Josh suddenly appeared in front of them and said that there was a guest upstairs who wanted to invite them up for a drink. Mary and Susan looked towards the second floor. A woman about the same age as them was smiling at them and raising her glasses. The two of them walked upstairs, and they discovered that this was an independent area. The woman was the only one sitting on the large European-style sofa in the middle. There was a waiter or someone standing quietly next to the sofa. "Hello, you two. My name is Nessa Damaskinus. You can call me Nessa. Please sit down." This woman named Nisha showed a special aristocratic temperament in her movements, but Mary always felt that she seemed a little too pale. After Nisha's introduction, they both found out that Josh's modeling agency was her family's business. Nisha's family is in Europe, on the other side of the ocean. It is a very old family. Now she is the spokesperson for their entire family. The three of them talked happily, but Mary always felt a little uneasy. Until the two of them drank more and more, and Nisha on the opposite side did not react at all. Mary forced herself to calm down, intending to take Susan, who was still reluctant to leave, and quietly took out her mobile phone to call Scene. Nisha noticed Mary's unusual movements, but she didn't care. Looking at the Ticketons who wanted to escape, she stretched out her tongue and licked her sharp fangs, thinking of the feast she could enjoy later. Her teeth began to itch. Natasha, who has transformed into Pepper's assistant again, has been very busy these 2 days. Look, she is still working overtime so late. Originally, she just wanted Scene to go to New Mexico to help, but who knew that he would disappear. After helping Natasha couldn't contact Scene yet, so she could only help Pepper with Stark Group's work, while waiting for Scene to come back and contact him. After all, she was still his liaison before Nick Fury gave another order, but today she suddenly received a message from S.H.I.E.L.D. Shit. Looking at the encrypted content displayed on the screen, Natasha couldn't help but swear, then said hello to Pepper and ran out. Whoa. Pepper wanted to ask a few more questions, but suddenly remembered Natasha's identity as an agent and stopped talking. As soon as she came out of Stark Group, Natasha drove all the way, and her destination was exactly where May and Susan were. Chapter 53. Really tight-lipped. Looking at the three-pointed two-edged sword that appeared in his hand with a slight squeeze, Scene laughed happily. This sword is good, but it is too big to carry. Although it has the same characteristics as Mjolnir, it can't smash a lot of things every time it is summoned like a certain blonde male model. It's not civilized at all, right? It just so happens that Scene has been studying the magic of camouflage and the power of Asgard's runes recently. He combined some characteristics and similarities of the two magics to create the magic that he is using now to summon and hide the three-pointed two-edged sword. Unfortunately, this magic has not reached the space level, otherwise it can be used as a storage space point. Just when Scene was about to apply this magic to other items, his charging mobile phone rang. "Hi. Mary, what's wrong?" Scene picked up the phone, then glanced at the opposite room, and didn't see Mary's figure. Hearing the voice from the other side of the phone receiver, Scene immediately turned on the full power monitoring mode and found Mary's location at once. As Scene walked out, he frowned and listened to the noise from Mary's side. There were 3 people with Mary. No, 2 of them were not human, and they had no heartbeat at all. Even most of the people in the bar where Mary was had no heartbeat. Vampire. Scene thought. This was really the first time he had seen one. How come there was no news in the past 20 years? These people were really tight-lipped. He had just discovered Natasha's movements. It seemed that she was also going to the place where Mary was. Could it be that S.H.I.E.L.D. was also connected with these creatures? Or was S.H.I.E.L.D. monitoring the people around him? Scene, who was going to fly directly over, thought about it and decided to keep a low profile and drove to where Mary was. Natasha arrived almost at the same time as Scene. When Scene arrived, the security guard at the door would not let him in. Nisha was about to start enjoying her blood meal today, which was presented to her by her blood servant. As the current helmsman of the Damascus family, Nisha's favorite thing was the blood of beautiful women. Mary and Susan were already drunk and unconscious. Nisha looked at the bright red and strong blood vessels under the white skin between the clothes of the 2 people lying on the sofa. Her fangs began to grow longer. She gently lifted Mary's head and pushed aside Mary's long hair that was in the way, revealing her slender and smooth neck. Nisha gently sniffed the smell that was fatal to her. Bang. Stop. Natasha finally arrived. After hurrying, Nisha looked at this beautiful woman who disturbed her good mood. "Oh, is there another one? What day is today? Buy 2 get 1 free." Then she turned her head and looked at the commotion downstairs. It turned out that the other voice just now was the security guard who was hit by something. "Nisha." The waiter next to Nisha spoke. The black waiter seemed to know Natasha. He asked, "Why are you here?" Natasha didn't know how this guy knew her identity. Her first priority now was to take Mary away. She thought the commotion on the first floor just now was directed at her. "I want to take this woman away." Natasha pointed at Mary on the sofa and said, "I don't think so. We didn't break our agreement with you, and you are not qualified to come to our territory and make decisions." Hearing this, Nisha guessed Natasha's identity, or guessed that Natasha was from S.H.I.E.L.D. Nisha and her friends had dealt with S.H.I.E.L.D. before entering the country and had contacted with them several times in Europe before. For some reason, S.H.I.E.L.D. did not shout and kill vampires, but instead made 3 rules for each other. Just as the black waiter finished speaking, he suddenly began to scream, and his whole body burst into flames and burned spontaneously, just like the sunlight that their vampire clan was most afraid of. But this was clearly indoors. Where did the sunlight come from? When did New York become your territory? Natasha heard the voice behind her and knew that the overall situation was settled. "You are late. Be careful that Mary and I will report you," Natasha said with a pout without turning her head. "You 2 aren't close enough to complain about each other, are you?" Scene said as he walked towards Mary. Seeing that the newcomer was so oblivious to her, Nisha waved her hand, and several vampires followed her and attacked Scene. But all of these vampires died tragically, just like the black waiter just now. This, what on earth is going on? Nisha was in disbelief. Because what happened was too weird. Nisha didn't dare to act rashly against any of Scene's actions, and when Scene came forward, she quickly stepped back several steps. So Scene stepped forward, holding Mary and the unknown blonde in one hand, and came directly to Natasha. Scene held Mary's hand, and the energy in his body slowly flowed to her, and soon Mary woke up. Scene. Mary rushed to Scene. As soon as she saw him. The girl was really scared, because she knew that someone like Nisha would definitely not rob her. "It's okay. You and Natasha help your good friend leave first. I'll take care of this. Scene gently patted May's soft and tense back point. When May heard Scene's words, she saw Natasha next to her. Her face immediately turned red, as if she had taken a big gulp of wine. At the same time, she began to wonder why Scene and Natalie came together. But why did Scene call Natasha just now? Even if you are agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so what? We have an agreement between the two parties. Nessa said in a cowardly manner, standing opposite Point. May then saw that Nessa's appearance seemed to have changed. She had a noble feeling before, but now she gave people a weird feeling, especially those two long fangs. What is she? Come out with me first. I'll tell you slowly. Seeing Natasha leading the well-behaved May and the unconscious blonde out, Scene turned his sight back and looked at the female vampire in front of him. Under Scene's perspective eyes, her body structure was clear at a glance. There was no difference from ordinary humans. The only difference was the strength of the flesh. I don't know and don't want to know about the agreement between you and S.H.I.E.L.D., but you almost hurt my people today. Scene walked to the big European sofa and sat down, looking at the various kinds of wine in front of him with interest. Do vampires have feelings when drinking? Then, what do you want? Nisha asked with a frown. No, it's not what I want, but you. How do you want to satisfy me and save all your people here? Heh, don't you think you said too much? Really? Scene paused with his hand holding the wine, and all the vampires present screamed. Chapter 54 Vampire. Nisha panicked as she watched all the vampires upstairs and downstairs gradually burn. What was even more terrifying was that she had no idea what kind of means the man in front of her had used. Was it air? Or something else? Stop it. Scene frowned slightly, and all the vampires present immediately knelt on the ground in pain, and the whole bar was wailing. The human blood servants present were panicked and unbelievable as they watched the vampires they worshipped and believed in kneeling on the ground and wailing in pain, being played around by a man. I'm sorry. It's my fault. Please stop. Nisha realized that she was afraid of hitting a wall today, and she finally adjusted her attitude. She didn't expect that she came to New York to invite someone this time, but she would meet such a big star as Scene, whose mysterious attack method was completely confusing. Come here, sit down. Scene's tone was not tough, but Nisha didn't dare to question it at all. Nisha sorted out her emotions and slowly walked to the other side of the sofa and sat down facing Scene. As Nisha sat down, the burned vampires finally stopped screaming and wailing. They covered their wounds and dared not breathe, waiting for the final negotiation result of the two people on the second floor. Introduce yourselves first. Nisha looked at Scene leaning on the back of the sofa with a dazed look. She didn't expect Scene to ask this, looking at Scene who was close at hand. Nisha was confident that she could hit him with one shot, but the miserable state of the vampires who rushed up before, and the burned appearance of the vampires lying on the ground upstairs and downstairs who had not recovered, made her dare not move rashly. Nisha thought that when Scene asked her to introduce herself, did he mean to introduce their vampire clan? After taking a few deep breaths, Nisha could only try to say what she knew concisely and clearly. Nisha's father, Eli Damascus, founded their family hundreds of years ago. After hundreds of years of development and accumulation, Eli Damascus established a huge underground vampire empire. He ruled nearly half of the vampires in Europe. Nisha was his only daughter and his heir. While building a huge vampire empire, Eli Damascus also extended his clutches to other continents. This bar was just one of the forces and wealth they had. In recent years, a vampire hunter appeared in New York. In fact, the profession of vampire hunter has always existed, but this new one is very special. Vampires call him Daywalker. It is said that he is a half-human half-vampire hybrid, with the power of a vampire, but without the weakness of a vampire, and can walk freely in the sun. The purpose of Nisha's visit this time is him, the man who calls himself Blade. You just said that your family only ruled half of the vampires in Europe? Scene noticed an interesting point in Nisha's narration. Yes. Nisha replied. What about the other half? I don't know either. I just know that both sides are very restrained and try not to have big frictions. Nisha answered thoughtfully. Then you came to find that Blade this time because he killed too many of your people, so you were sent to kill him. Nisha hesitated. She shouldn't reveal any of this information to SYN, but the lives of her and the vampires present are now in SYN's hands. In fact, a new mutant appeared in Europa not long ago. It can not only suck human blood, but also vampire blood. More importantly, the vampires sucked by it will become its infected, and their demand for blood is even stronger. They have to eat almost every day. If they can't be stopped, I'm afraid there will be no more vampires soon, and at that time, their goal, you mean they will eventually find humans, right? SYN had a headache. Why are there so many troubles? He remembered that there were no vampires in the movies he watched in his previous life. Did they merge? Nisha didn't answer SYN's question. She felt that if she could trick this guy into taking action, she might not need to hire any blades. You want me to take action against them? SYN looked at Nisha with a joking smile and told her little thoughts. Even if it's true as you said, I really don't like those mutants, but you overlooked one problem. I feel the same way about you. After hearing what SYN said, Nisha realized that, in essence, she and those mutants were no different in SYN's eyes. They were all aliens. Our tribe has an agreement with SHIELD. We will not kill humans or suck human blood at will. The people you see in the bar are blood servants who worship and believe in us. They are willing to donate blood. Nisha explained stutteringly. Oh, what about my friends? SYN glanced at Nisha like lightning, and Nisha trembled all over. This. Occasionally, there will be some special circumstances. I'm not sure. In fact, Nisha did not lie. After the vampire clan and SHIELD reached an agreement, high-level vampire rulers like Nisha and others were basically tributes for food. These tributes were all offered by blood servants or lower-level vampires. As for how they got them, high-level vampires like Nisha may or may not know. Even if they know, as long as there is no big trouble, they will just let it go. Since we are talking about this again, let's continue to talk about what we talked about at the beginning. Nisha's nerves jumped. She knew that SYN was talking about how to satisfy him so that he would let them go. Although our vampire clan cannot be seen in the light, we control many people, including many Cheebles and politicians. What does that have to do with me? SYN took a sip of wine. We can be your most solid ally, Nisha said confidently. SYN couldn't help laughing when he heard what Nisha said. Seeing SYN like this, Nisha thought he was moved. Bang. SYN put the wine glass on the coffee table in front of him, turned his head, and raised his eyebrows to look at Nisha. Allies? You guys who can't even see the light are worthy. Hearing SYN's insulting words, Nisha subconsciously wanted to open her mouth to scold him, but she suppressed her inner dissatisfaction because she saw SYN's hand took out a strange shaped giant sword out of thin air. Not to mention how this giant sword was taken out of thin air. Just the aura emitted by the giant sword made Nisha feel uneasy, not to mention the golden red energy flowing and the diamond shaped gap on the giant sword. Nisha didn't even have the courage to take another look, for fear that she would be blinded by the energy. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Blood Contract. At first, SYN didn't expect that the eternal fire in his body could have such a strong resistance to vampires. When the eternal fire entered his body, it blended with his body energy. His body was full of the energy of the sun, which also made the eternal fire in his body have the properties of the sun point. But can it still be called the eternal fire? Or should it be called the sun fire? Seeing SYN took out his weapon, Nisha thought that SYN was going to attack them. She could only fight to the death and said, I can be your blood slave. As long as I'm in power, the entire vampire empire will respect you. SYN looked at the woman who said she wanted to be his slave. Didn't she just take out a knife? Although it was a little big and a little weird in shape, it wouldn't be scary, right? In fact, SYN wanted to see if the three-pointed two-edged sword infused with the energy of the eternal fire also had a restraining effect on vampires. The fact proved that it was. Nisha's body kept shrinking back. She was avoiding the three-pointed two-edged sword. SYN looked at Nisha's pale face. Although she was a vampire, It was undeniable that Nisha had a good temperament, which was the aristocratic temperament that had been accumulated for hundreds of years. With a turn of his wrist, the three-pointed double-edged sword disappeared instantly. Scene saw the nervous Nisha's side. Why should I believe you? There is an ancient blood contract in our family. As long as I offer my blood and sign the blood contract, you can control my life and death at will, no matter where I am. Nisha was talking about the most humble blood contract in their family. This blood contract was equivalent to Nisha handing her life directly to Scene, and Scene didn't have to pay any price at all, and could even give the blood contract to others at will point. Hearing Nisha being so humble just to survive, Scene couldn't help but be moved. Nisha saw Scene nodded slightly in agreement, and she collapsed on the sofa. Although she had to offer the blood contract, it was better than dying now. Moreover, this blood contract is not unsolvable. In principle, the person who made the blood contract cannot touch the blood contract, but Nisha can do something when making the blood contract, so that the person who made the contract can take back the blood contract in the future. Not long after, Nisha stood up from the sofa. She raised the index finger of her right hand, and saw a drop of dark red blood gradually gathered above her fingertips. The color of the blood formed a sharp contrast with the whiteness of her fingers. Nisha thought about it, and then put the drop of blood on the necklace on her neck. As Nisha put the blood on, she was still chanting in a low voice. At the same time, Scene also keenly felt the magic breath around him. After Nisha's operation, she took off the necklace on her neck, and handed it to Scene. As soon as Scene took the necklace, he felt that Nisha's life and death now only needed his thought to do it. And the dark magic on the blood contract of the necklace caused this result. Grabbing the necklace and putting down the wine glass, Scene stood up, and Nisha immediately followed. For a moment, all the vampires and blood servants at the scene stared at the two of them until Scene turned around and started to walk downstairs. Nisha then realized that Scene had accepted it and hurriedly trotted behind Scene. The vampires and blood servants along the way saluted the two of them respectfully, not daring to overstep their boundaries. Scene sent her back until Nisha sent her out of the bar. She should be fine now that Natasha is taking care of her, so she should go to Kamataj first. Scene looked at the necklace in his palm. He wanted to know the source of the dark magic on it, so he could only go to that dimension. Deadbeat. Kamataj. Wang sat in his own room, looking solemnly at the expanding teleportation aperture in front of him, and habitually glanced at the mobile phone on the table, but did not play any songs. Hello, Wang. I haven't seen you for so long. Have you missed me? Scene's voice arrived before him. No, nonsense. You obviously want to. Why are you here? Wang looked like he didn't welcome you very much. I have something to ask the Supreme Mage. Scene picked up the apple on Wang's table and took a bite. Sweet. Seeing Scene trapped on his table, eating his apple and smacking his lips, Wang's face couldn't help but twitch twice. Then, go find her directly. Why come to my room? The Supreme Mage is a woman after all. If you just pass it over like this, what if it's not very embarrassing? So I have to stay here first. Scene continued to chew the apple and walked out of Wang's room. Wang looked at the opened door, the missing apple on the table, and Scene's back that had already walked away. What was I doing just now? Why did you have time to come to my place? Guyi was not in her own room, but meditating in the living room. Scene took the last bite of the apple, walked to Guyi, and sat cross-legged opposite her. Before he had finished chewing the apple flesh in his mouth, Guyi opened her eyes and stared at him. You have the breath of dark magic. Scene paused with the apple core in his hand and then continued to put the core on the coffee table between the two of them. It's Brother Siwazhe's fault. Guyi rolled his eyes. Swallow what's in your mouth before you talk. Ahem. I said I came here for this. Scene finally swallowed the apple, and he picked up the teapot on the coffee table and poured himself a cup of tea. It's really good tea. Scene pretended to smell it and praised it. You know it's good tea before you even drink it. Scene drank it in one gulp and then continued. Good tea. You drank the boiled water that was just boiled yesterday. Guyi looked at Scene unhappily. She knew that Scene probably wanted her help with something, so he would do that. No one said boiled water is not tea. Scene explained with a stiff face. Tell me, what's the situation? Guyi was too lazy to argue with him and asked directly. Scene took out the necklace and told Guyi about the situation of this vampire clan. When Guyi took the necklace, he whispered, "Zisung, Zisung?" Scene frowned and looked at Guyi. "Yes, it is the ancient demon god. The dark book was written by it. I think the vampires you are talking about should be the ones whose ancestors used the dark magic in the dark book to transform them into vampires. It sounds like this magic is not very good. It turns into that kind of creature and can't even see the Sunday." Scene couldn't help but complain, "Can you stop comparing yourself? Compared to you, it's not that good either." Ancient One took a deep breath and continued, "Don't underestimate Zithorn. Although it can't enter our world now, it is always looking for opportunities." Chapter 56. Is this a proper necklace? After Scene finished talking about the necklace, Ancient One mentioned again that he wanted to pass the position of Supreme Sorcerer to Scene. "I'm really not interested." Scene looked at Ancient One with a bitter face and rejected Ancient One's proposal again. Well, actually I know you will refuse in the end, but I always wonder if there is a possibility that you will agree. You secretly watch the trailer by yourself again. Scene looked at Ancient One strangely. Ancient One smiled and poured Scene a glass of boiled water again, saying, "That's because of you. Thanks to you, I have increased my workload." Scene thought about it. It seems that he hasn't done anything out of the ordinary recently. "Supreme Sorcerer." A familiar voice sounded at the door. Scene turned his head and looked. It turned out to be the little black Mordo again. "Mordo, it seems that there is no teaching task today. What do you have to do?" Ancient One looked at Mordo, who suddenly appeared calmly. When Mordo's eyes swept over Scene, they were full of sinisterness, and then he bowed respectfully to Guyi with the appearance of a devout believer, explaining that he was here to ask for advice on magic. Guyi glanced at Scene, and Scene looked at Mordo with a bit of disdain and got up and left, not even taking the apple core left on the coffee table. Going home from Kamatage only requires a move of hand. Scene stepped out of the aperture and looked at the two women in the living room. One was looking at him with her mouth wide open and full of surprise, and the other was slowly lowering her guard with her hands but frowning, with obvious confusion in her eyes. "Why are you in my house?" It turned out that these two people were Natasha and Mary, who had just come out of the bar. There was an unconscious blonde lying on the sofa. Before Natasha and Mary helped Susan out of the bar and got into the car driven by Natasha. Mary wanted to speak several times in the car, but she held back. "What about her?" Mary didn't speak, but Natasha, who was driving, spoke. Hearing Natasha's question, Mary, who was sitting in the back taking care of Susan, was also a little confused. Today she was going to enjoy the nightlife with Susan, but who knew it would turn out like this? "I don't know." Then the two looked at each other in silence. Originally, the two had no special contact because of Scene, and the silence was even more awkward. Fortunately, there was soothing music playing in the car. Natasha was going to drive, and Mary pretended to look at Susan. Natasha was also a little absent-minded. She drove the car to the downstairs of their apartment without realizing it. Since they were all back, Natasha could only ask, "Why don't we take her to your house first? Peter should be asleep by now." Mary looked at the time and immediately showed an embarrassed look on her face. "Find a hotel. It's not safe. She's drunk like this." If Susan was sent to the hotel, someone would have to stay to take care of her. Natasha was naturally impossible, so it could only be Mary. Mary actually didn't want to go to the hotel to take care of Susan. She wanted to wait for Scene to come back. Natasha was the same. She also wanted to wait for Scene to come back. Seeing through Mary's thoughts, Natasha smiled and secretly cursed Scene 100 times in her heart. Then, "Let's just go to Scene's house and wait. Anyway, he will come back to see you, so let's wait until he comes back." That's not good. How can we get in anyway? Hearing Natasha's words, Mary looked at her in surprise. Have they reached the point of exchanging keys with each other? Don't worry about that. Natasha smiled wickedly, and Mary in the backseat suddenly had a bad feeling. "So, you picked my lock?" Scene looked at Natasha in surprise when he heard this. He knew that Mary would not do such a thing. Natasha raised her little face with an expression of I did it. Scene was speechless and was about to turn around to see if his door lock could be saved. Natasha patted her chest and said directly, "Don't worry, your lock is fine. I'm a professional." Watching Natasha's actions, Scene suddenly felt a sway in front of his eyes. Huh? What happened? Why are you not angry at all? Blinking hard, Scene walked to the sofa and sat down. Looking at the two girls who seemed to be hesitant to speak, he knew what they wanted to ask. Simple teleportation magic. Just wear this and think about where you want to go to open the portal. The more specific you think, the more stable the portal will be. Scene gestured to the two of them with the hanging ring on his hand. Oh my god. Does magic really exist? Mary was surprised and kept turning her head to look at the place where Scene just appeared. Natasha's reaction was much calmer. She had already talked about magic when she communicated with Nick Fury last time, but Scene had not shown it in front of them yet. What about the woman in the bar just now? Mary thought of Nessa's weird look again and asked curiously, "That's a vampire. If we hadn't arrived today, you would have been sucked dry by her," Natasha said deliberately, scaring Mary to the point of fear, and then looking at Natasha with resentment. Scene looked at the interaction between the two and felt something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Did the bar matter get resolved? Didn't it cause any big trouble? Natasha asked with some concern. She remembered Scene's previous moves. No, really, why? Don't you go back and take a look yourself? Natasha saw Scene was so sure, so she gave up and didn't care. In the end, it was her superior who had to worry about it. What about this? Natasha nodded at Susan, who was lying on the sofa. This is easy to deal with. Anyway, she drank too much. In the end, because of Susan, Mary had to stay at Scene's place. Today, she had to accept too much information. After sending away Natasha, who looked resentful, and helping Mary carry Susan into the guest room, Scene took out the Blood Covenant necklace of Nisha. He was a little interested in the dark magic on it. However, what Scene didn't know was that when he was fiddling with the Blood Covenant necklace, something strange happened to the original owner of the necklace. In the building where the vampire bar was located, Nisha told Assad, who was sent by her father to New York to assist her, what had just happened, but she concealed the Blood Covenant. Check the background of that man, Nisha said in a cold tone, and then thought of Natasha and added, it may be related to S.H.I.E.L.D. In addition, have you found out the whereabouts of Blade? If you have found out, do you need to arrange a blood servant to contact him? Assad asked. The reason for using a blood servant is that Blade will kill them vampires when he sees them. No, I want to meet this legendary daywalker in person. Nisha was full of anger and was looking for someone to vent. Assad nodded in response and then saw Nisha suddenly frowned. He asked strangely, what's wrong? It's okay, you go first. Nisha regained her composure and waved her hand to let Assad leave. Just after Assad left, Nisha's legs suddenly softened and she collapsed on the sofa. The whole person was shaking, as if she had been electrocuted, and her desperately suppressed screams lingered in the room. Scene looked at the necklace in front of him with an inexplicable expression. When he was fiddling with the necklace just now, he saw the picture of the female vampire Nisha. But Nisha's condition. Scene suddenly felt that the necklace in his hand was not a serious thing. Chapter 57. Didn't you replenish your blood before going out? After Natasha returned home, she reported to Nick Fury what happened to Scene. This was her mission. After listening to Agent Romanov's report, Nick Fury turned on his computer and started searching. S.I.E.L.D. has relevant files on the vampire tribe, and Nick Fury only learned about it after he took office as director. SHIELD once tried to wipe them out, but the effect was not ideal. This tribe is too old, has a deep foundation, and has strong individual combat power. If it were not for various weaknesses, it would be really difficult to deal with. In the end, the two sides had to reach a truce agreement, but SHIELD has never stopped monitoring this tribe. According to the information, the origin of the vampire tribe is in Europe, and the specific reason for its appearance is now difficult to verify. It is worth noting that the entire tribe is clearly divided into two factions, one of which is headed by the Damascus family. Instead of deliberately concealing their identities, They are committed to gradually expanding outward in order to establish a huge vampire empire. It was also because of the expansion of the Damascus family that S.H.I.E.L.D. discovered their traces. The other faction is a bit mysterious according to the information. They are clearly separated from the vampires of the Damascus family, and the two sides have even been in constant friction point, and they will deliberately hide their identities and whereabouts. Shields description of their information is: they seem to be busy fighting against another alien race werewolf. Nick Fury rubbed his eyebrows, and he felt that the burden on his shoulders was getting heavier and heavier. The next day. On the vampire side, Assad reported to Nissa that Blade had returned to his base. Nissa immediately made a plan. She would personally attack Blade's base and test Blade's true strength. An unknown warehouse in the suburbs of New York. Blade solemnly wiped the silver sword in his hand. This was an old friend who followed him to hunt vampires. Now he had to face Abraham Whistler, his old buddy who had always followed him to hunt vampires. Last night, Blade had just rescued the infected Whistler from a vampire stronghold. Facing his mentor, father, and only relative, Blade chose to give him a chance. With the help of his new partner, Scud, Blade injected Whistler with an antidote and locked him in the storage room of the warehouse. If he could survive the painful reversal process like drug withdrawal, he would be able to return to normal. Otherwise Blade would have to kill him himself. After opening the door of the storage room, the sun shone into the storage room through the ventilation grill. Blade looked at the empty seat in the middle, glanced at the shadow in the corner, and clenched the gun loaded with silver-plated bullets in his hand. Blade breathed a sigh of relief when he saw his old friend Whistler emerge from the shadow and expose himself to the sun. Outside the warehouse, a car that almost blended into the night slowly approached and stopped. Two black shadows quickly jumped down from the car and disappeared in the moonlight. Nisha originally planned to come alone, but Assad was worried about her safety and insisted on accompanying her. The two of them sneaked into the warehouse of Blade's base with light movements. Nisha's mouth corners curled slightly under her mask, and a trace of disdain flashed in her heart. That's it. Just as Nisha shuttled around the periphery of the warehouse and kept approaching the center and despised the vigilance of this legendary daywalker, the light source of the entire warehouse suddenly changed. Hanging upside down on the beam, looking at the ultraviolet light in the warehouse through special glasses. Nisha, who was covered with special clothes, curled her mouth corners. I expected it a long time ago. She turned her head and nodded to Assad next to her, and the two landed lightly on the ground of the warehouse. Da 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 da. Whistler held an automatic rifle and fired at the two little ghosts who dared to invade. Unfortunately, Nisha and Assad reacted too quickly, and Whistler couldn't hit them at all. Assad switched positions and rushed to Whistler and knocked the gun out of Whistler's hand with just two light shots and knocked him down. Picking up the automatic rifle on the ground, Assad controlled Whistler and the Scud, who was frightened and surrendered. Nisha heard the footsteps behind her with her extraordinary hearing. She turned around and saw Blade holding the long sword behind his back. Blade quickly moved and stood still and gestured to the Scud, who was controlled by Assad. The special headlights behind him turned on immediately. Unfortunately, Nisha and Assad were both wearing anti-aircraft suits. The special glasses shrank rapidly under the headlights and then recovered immediately, switching to daylight mode. Nisha looked at Blade, who was expected by them every step, and despised him even more. She drew out her double knives and started to attack Blade. Looking at Nisha, who was constantly waving and spinning the double knives in front of her, Blade turned his wrist and stood in front of her with the long sword in his backhand without unsheathing it. Blade used the long sword in his hand to quickly block the left and right slashes of Nisha's two swords, then rotated his wrist to suppress Nisha's low stabs with two swords, and used the force of Nisha's blade to rotate the long sword again to reverse and press the long sword in Nisha's hand to her neck, forcing Nisha to step back quickly to relieve the force. Seeing that she was suppressed, Nisha immediately raised her leg to sweep Blade's lower body. Blade, who had rich combat experience, also hit back with his legs, but the suppression force on his hands was immediately dispersed. After Nisha escaped, she swung the two swords again and attacked with a combo, but Blade blocked it with her long sword. Nisha took advantage of the momentum of the sword to jump down and slash, but Blade still dodged it by leaning sideways. Assad, who controlled the sprint, saw that Nisha couldn't take down Blade, so he unloaded the magazine of his rifle and threw the gun forward To help point after several close combat moves, Blade used his scabbard to block Nisha's longsword. Noticing Assad's movements behind him, Blade easily blocked Nisha's attack and jumped to the side to avoid Assad's sneak attack, then threw a dart to block Nisha. Seeing that the sneak attack failed, Assad drew out the short sword on his back and continued to attack Blade's lower body, but was unfortunately clamped by Blade's legs and then kicked away. Nisha, who blocked the dart, stepped forward and stabbed with the sword. Blade saw two opponents going into battle, ducked to avoid Nisha's straight stab, drew out the longsword to block Nisha's other longsword that was about to chop down, and began to fight the enemy with the longsword. Just as Blade fought with the two people for several moves and was not at a disadvantage, Nisha, who was about to continue the attack, suddenly stumbled. She felt that her body began to have the same strange feeling as yesterday. At the same time, for some reason, she began to think of Scene, the master of her blood contract. Nisha frowned, clenched her hands holding the two swords, and suppressed the strange feeling in her body and heart. Blade, holding the long sword, frowned in confusion as he looked at Nisha, who suddenly seemed to have weak legs and stood there with a slight tremor. What happened? So weak? Didn't he replenish blood before going out? Assad on the side thought Nisha had given up the plan, so he shouted loudly, "Wait, we are here to pass on the information. You started it first." Assad cleverly pushed the cause of the action to Blade. "We are representatives sent by the rulers of the Vampire Empire. They hope that there can be a truce between us. They want to meet with you." Chapter 58. Brother King Kong is indestructible. Nessa kept thinking about Scene's domineering and powerful attitude towards them in the bar. Only then did she realize that the sudden strange feeling came from the blood contract. She should have been full of hatred and anger towards Scene, but a strange feeling towards Scene gradually emerged in her heart. Stop. Just as Nisha continued to suppress the strange feeling in her heart, Scene, who was studying the necklace on the other side, suddenly raised his head in confusion. He heard Nisha's voice. Scene thought to himself, huh? What's going on? At this moment, Nessa also heard Scene's voice, and she began to respond in her heart. What are you doing? Scene heard Nisha's question, and he responded, "Is this your attitude when talking to your blood contract owner?" Master, no matter what you are doing to my blood contract, can you please stop for a moment? Nisha wants to kill someone now, but her life is in someone else's hands." Scene saw Nessa's vision again. He saw Blade holding a long sword. Although he didn't recognize it, did this guy wear sunglasses indoors because he didn't think he was black enough? However, Scene also realized that this did not seem to be a place for normal communication. He remembered Nessa's reaction when the blood contract was triggered last time and suddenly understood. Couldn't he feel it just during the fight? Scene scratched his head in embarrassment. Ahem. What about that? I didn't do anything. You continue. I believe you. Nisha felt that her whole body had returned to normal again, and knowing that there was a high probability that Scene would never touch the blood contract again, she couldn't help but cursed in her heart. Seeing that Assad had stopped his offensive, Nisha put away her weapon and sword. Seeing the blade still maintaining its fighting posture, Assad could only put away the weapon like Nissa, and he took out the token and handed it over. Blade took the token, and he asked Scud to turn off the headlights to restore normal lighting, and then asked Assad and Nissa to take off their masks. Nissa, who took off her mask, was still a little unconvinced. She looked at the blade and said, "You have always been our most feared enemy, but recently a more terrifying guy has appeared, even scarier than you." Nisha was originally talking about the mutant, but when she said this, she suddenly thought of Scene again. That damn guy was probably the scariest thing. When she thought of Scene, Nissa began to feel uncomfortable again. Blade looked at the abnormal Nisha and thought she was frightened by the guy scarier than him, she said, which made him immediately interested. Ever since Blade started hunting vampires, there has never been a so-called truce between them. He has always maintained an attitude of eradicating evil towards the vampire clan, which also made the vampires hate him deeply. But now the vampire actually initiated a truce against him, which is really interesting. Blade accepted the vampire's invitation and went to Europa together to meet Nissa's father in a modern defensive fortress. Blade meets Ellie Damascus, the true ruler of the Vampire Empire. And when they left, S.H.I.E.L.D. also received the news Nick Fury thought about Natasha's report and the information that S.H.I.E.L.D. later collected about the bar incident. He picked up the phone and called Natasha. Scene was eating at May's place today. Looking at the table full of dishes, he said it didn't smell like taquiat at all. Peter came out of the room after finishing his homework and ran to the dining table excitedly to look at Scene. Scene, can you come to my house for dinner every day from now on? May, who was coming out of the kitchen with walnut and candied date bread, heard Peter's words and her ears turned red. What are you talking about? Peter, go wash your hands and get ready for dinner. That's right. As long as Scene comes over, I don't have to eat the food you cook. Peter turned his head and whispered to Scene in a low voice, I kind of doubt that my body is so weak just because I grew up. Eat the food cooked by Aunt May. It makes sense. Scene was stunned for a moment after hearing Peter's words. You kid really knows how to grasp the key points. What are you two mumbling about? May put down the plate and patted Peter on the head, and Peter ran into the kitchen to wash his hands. Don't listen to Peter's nonsense. My cooking is quite delicious. May looked at Scene sheepishly and explained. Seeing May's beautiful and delicious appearance, Scene said that it was indeed delicious. Bang bang bang. While the two were flirting with each other, there was a knock on the door. I'll drive it. Peter ran out of the kitchen waving his hands. Hi, Peter, looking at Natasha, who lowered her head to greet him outside the door. Peter also responded happily. Hi, Natalie. Scene thought Natasha was also here for a meal, so he greeted her to come in without even noticing that he was at May's house. When Natasha saw May enthusiastically inviting her in, she took Peter's little hand and walked in. Wow. It's so rich. Natasha looked at Scene with a strange expression. Feeling Natasha's glare, Scene said, May said she wanted to thank you for staying overnight that night. Yes, it was all thanks to you that day, Natasha. Let's just go together. May was a little embarrassed. She wanted to thank Scene and Natasha separately so that she could be alone with Scene. That's great. I just got off work and haven't had dinner yet. I'm starving. Natasha walked to the other side of Scene and sat down, stepping hard on Scene's feet with her high heels. Scene glanced at Natasha and shook his head. You know I'm indestructible, but I can handle my small high heels. What's wrong? May looked at Scene's expression strangely. Nothing. Let's get started. After spending this tortured dinner at May's house, Natasha said she had something to discuss with Scene, and then she was going to go to his house with Scene to talk. Can I go too? May looked at the two of them carefully, and she seemed to have exhausted all her strength to say this. Natasha was stunned for a moment, then turned to look at Scene. You sure you want to listen? Scene asked. Natasha was most likely looking for him for those extraordinary things, and Scene was not sure whether he should let May know. Yeah. May nodded firmly. After understanding the mysterious side of Scene, she was not afraid to retreat, but more determined her feelings. Then, let's go together. Scene waved his hand. Can I go too? Peter tilted his head and looked at the happy Aunt May. No. X3 woo woo woo. You bully people. Ignoring Peter, who returned to his room with a face full of resentment, the three of them came to Scene's house. Tell me, what's the matter? Scene poured 2 glasses of water for them and then sat on the single sofa on the side. S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to ask you for help. Natasha looked at May, who was sitting on the multi-person sofa with her with a serious expression, and then said to Scene, Oh, about vampires. Nick Fury asked you to come. Does he know how much I'm going to pay for helping Tony and Pepper? Scene looked at Natasha and suddenly had an idea in his mind. He said you can make an offer and we can bargain, Natasha said with a smile. Ouch. Chapter 59 Subway Gunfight. Scene was speechless as he looked at Natasha, who was about to bargain with him. You can tell me what your conditions are and we can discuss them together. Natasha continued. If I really want to ask, he won't agree, even if I say it. Scene waved his hand. Natasha frowned in confusion. She didn't know what Scene wanted, and he was so sure that Nick Fury would not agree. In fact, Scene didn't want much at this stage, and there was only one space gem in S.H.I.E.L.D. that Scene could take a fancy to, which was the cosmic cube that S.H.I.E.L.D. had been studying. How could Nick Fury give him this thing? But Scene didn't care. Anyway, the black salted egg couldn't be kept in the end, and it was just a waste of effort. Then, why are you willing to make a move? Natasha was still unwilling to give up, otherwise. She suddenly paused and looked at Scene with seductive eyes. Otherwise what? What a long story perhaps, because Mary was present. Natasha was actually a little embarrassed. Mary, who was sitting and listening obediently, was waiting for Natasha's second half of the sentence, but after waiting for a long time, there was no response. When she turned around and saw Natasha's expression, Mary, who had experienced many battles, understood. Her ears quickly turned red and warm, and Mary covered her face and said, "I'm not pure anymore," and I understood it in seconds. Ahem. Scene moved his butt and crossed his legs. Then, just give me a small goal. Scene thought about it. Anyway, Nisha is his blood slave now, so he will treat it as helping his own people. How much? Mena's eyes widened directly. After all, this was an astronomical figure for her. Natasha was very calm. Too much. Give me a discount. Then how much do you say? 1 million. Poof. Scene sprayed out the water he had just drunk. What the hell? Is there anyone who bargains like you? Scene looked at Natasha with a dark face. This girl did it on purpose. If you want to get it for free, just say so. Can I get it for free? Natasha blinked her big eyes. Show some sincerity please. You are the ones who asked me to do it. Scene was helpless. Finally, Scene agreed to sell it at half price after Natasha's soft and hard grinding. But Natasha had to stay overnight. This little girl actually stood on the side of the black stewed egg to bargain with him, and her elbow was actually turned outward. Scene decided to let her know in the evening where her elbow should be turned. On the night of Europe, the street lights looked hazy and soft in the rain, adding a bit of mystery to this wet night. The coffee on the table was steaming upwards, and the water droplets on the window were slowly sliding down. Scene, sitting by the window, looked through the glass at the pedestrians hurriedly holding umbrellas in the rainy night, listening to the bells outside the window and the drizzle caressing the ancient stone road. Scene took a sip from the cup and couldn't help but think of the phrase coffee by the same point. Seeing those weirdos hurrying in the rain, Scene sighed. They haven't finished their coffee yet. Can't they show up later? It really ruins the mood. After calling the waiter to pay the bill, Scene held up a big black umbrella and stepped into the rain. Following the flow of people into the subway, a stale smell came down the steps. Scene put away his umbrella. This subway station is really shabby. Thinking of the bright, clean, tidy and orderly subway station in his previous life, Scene curled his lips in disdain. There is not even a security check. No wonder there are so many subway accidents. Is there a leather beauty looking at me? Maybe Scene's well-tailored suit is a bit out of place in this subway station, and coupled with Scene's ordinary and handsome face, people in the subway station will unconsciously look at Scene twice until the subway arrives, and then start their own journey again. There are vampires on the subway platform. A tall black man suddenly turned around, took out his gun and started shooting. The crowd panicked and began to flee. The man he was aiming at also quickly ran to the side of the pillar facing the subway to avoid the flying bullets. Scene stood in front of the steps with a black umbrella in his hand, watching the man being suppressed by the black man's double guns and not daring to show his head. The leather-clad beauty next to another pillar in the distance looked at Scene standing there and thought he was scared silly. But she didn't have time to pay attention, because at this moment, a man also appeared behind her and raised his gun and shot. Fortunately, the beauty reacted quickly and quickly ran to the other side of the pillar, thus avoiding the deadly bullets. But the man who was suppressed by the black man's gun was not so lucky. After the leather-clad woman dodged, he had to face the enemy directly. Bang bang bang. Several bullets hit his chest directly. Watching her companion fall in front of her, Selena's face was mixed with anger and fear, especially when she saw the purple light coming out of her companion's body from the inside out, and then it was quickly burned to ashes. Selena took a few deep breaths, pulled out the double guns from the waist of the leather jacket under the black windbreaker, shouted run to Scene who was still standing in front of the steps, and then rushed out of the pillar cover to start firing at the enemy who had shot at her before. Scene walked up to the pillar and poked the ashes left by the unlucky vampire who had just been burned to ashes with the tip of the long-handled black umbrella. Selena was forced to retreat again by Leohen's double guns, and Leohen's accomplices took the opportunity to change bullets and shoot again. But unfortunately they missed Selena and shot an innocent passerby point. Just as they were exchanging fire, a blonde man jumped out of the subway, dragged the injured woman to the corner to check her injuries, and tried to comfort and treat her, but for some reason, Leo and his accomplice followed and prepared to take the man away by force. Unfortunately, Selena shot him in the shoulder blade. Leo and his accomplice screamed, and faced with Selena's sharp shooting, he had to temporarily avoid the edge, and gave up the idea of taking the human man away. The gunfight between the two sides did not last long. Leo and his group's purpose should be to capture the blonde human man. They happened to be encountered by this group of vampires, and the two sides began to exchange fire. Scene looked at the blonde man in the corner, who was still in shock, and didn't understand what was special about him. Thank you. The blonde man looked at Scene's hand extended to him, thanked him and got up. My name is Mike Owen. You're welcome, Scene. You'd better leave quickly too. I don't know if those people will come back, Mike said to Scene with lingering fear as he watched Selena and Blackie run into the subway tunnel. He planned to leave here quickly. Scene didn't follow him. He had just marked his voice. It would only take a few seconds to find him next time. Walking into the subway, people were still immersed in the gunfight that had just happened. They all lay on the ground with their heads in their hands. Scene walked to the end of the carriage. The door of the last section of the carriage had been knocked away and fell not far away in the passage. The window glass fragments were scattered. In the passage, a black-haired monster was pressing a man and biting him fiercely. Chapter 60 YAREN-039 T Vampires Afraid of Silver? Scene jumped off the subway and walked along the passage. The black-haired monster was biting the man who was struggling underneath it. Suddenly, the black-haired monster raised its head and looked back at Scene, who was approaching. Raw. A strong bad breath hit his face, making Scene almost vomit. Snap. A big bag. Scene slapped the werewolf who unleashed the biological weapon against him against the wall of the passage. At the corner of the passage, Selena looked at the bloodstains and silver-plated bullets on the ground. She picked up the bullet and looked at it twice. It was shot from her gun. It had just hit the opposite shoulder blade, but now it didn't. See the traces of enemies. Selena looked back keenly, and she felt the airflow in the passage behind her. Carefully holding the gun against the corner wall, Selena prepared to deliver a fatal blow to the emerging enemy. The brightly lit subway roared past, and Selena breathed a sigh of relief. Scene looked at the stunning leather-clad beauty in front of him with interest. She lowered her head and then noticed that a pair of feet had appeared in front of her. Aha! Selena quickly raised her guns and pointed them at Scene. Her nervous expression suddenly turned into confusion the moment she saw Scene's face clearly. Why is it him? She had an impression of Scene. She had asked him to run quickly in the subway station just now. How could he appear here? Selena had subconsciously regarded Scene as bullets from an enemy's gun and poured out bullets. Click 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 click. Selena mechanically pulled the trigger, looking at the Scene in front of her with disbelief. That man blocked all her bullets with his hands. Just when Selena reacted and was about to change the magazine and continue, Scene reached out and grabbed her neck. The huge force caused Selena's feet to lift off the ground and her body to fly into the air. She could no longer hold the guns in her hands and kept grabbing Scene's arms with both hands. Scene frowned and looked at Selena in confusion, stretched out his other hand to grab Selena's left hand and looked at her palm and fingers. He had just seen her pick up the silver-plated bullets on the ground. What's going on? Aren't vampires restrained by silver? How can I still touch it? Selena tried to raise her feet to kick Scene, but unfortunately she didn't make any move. Scene's big hand grabbed her neck and tightened slightly, and she instantly lost all her strength in pain. Scene held her in front of her with one hand and observed her teeth. They were already sharp tiger teeth, but because of the pain, they were now more prominent, showing obvious vampire characteristics. Bang! Scene released his hold on Selena's neck and let her return to the ground. Unfortunately, because it was too painful just now, Selena sat on the ground with her legs weak and coughed in pain. Cough 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 cough. Selena raised her head and looked at the man in front of her in horror, wondering who he was and what he wanted to do. Let me ask you a few questions. Scene knelt down and looked at Selena with a smile, who retreated like a rabbit and leaned against the wall. Who are you? A cold voice came from the white neck that Scene had just pinched. Scene Hunter. Ah. You a werewolf? How come I've never heard of you? Scene was speechless. Hey, I'm asking you, can you figure out the situation? What kind of werewolf? Have you ever seen such a handsome werewolf? Selena was speechless, but she did feel that Scene was not like a werewolf. Werewolves lived in various caves and maintained certain beast habits, so most of them looked dirty. Dressing like Scene looked more beautiful, more like them vampires. Why aren't you afraid of silver? Scene asked. Selena frowned in confusion when she heard Scene's question. Ah, you really not a werewolf? Scene's patience was a little out of control. If Selena hadn't been pretty good looking and vacuum-like, he would have really gone berserk. No. Selena looked at Scene, who was about to lose his temper, and her body trembled slightly when she thought of his violent strength just now. We vampires are not afraid of silver, but werewolves are allergic to silver. Selena's lips trembled. Really? Are you afraid of the sun? Scene flipped his wrist and took out a 3-pointed two-edged knife. The moment the 3-pointed two-edged sword appeared, Selena immediately shrank into a ball and watched in horror as a huge sword suddenly appeared in Scene's hand. She doesn't have time to think about where Scene took out such a big sword now, because she feels a fear she has never felt before on this sword, which is a fear that only occurs when she faces the sun. At such a close distance, she felt like she might be burned to death. Looks like she's scared. Scene's look when he saw Selena was exactly the same as Nurse's look when she saw the 3-pointed two-edged sword point standing up, turning his wrist to put away the 3-pointed double-edged knife. Scene looked down at Selena. May I have your name? Without the threat of the 3-pointed two-edged sword, Selena seemed to have walked away from the gate of hell and replied blankly. Selena, just that sword just now. What? You want it? That sword is too big. You can't hold it. Scene heard something else and walked to the wellhead at the corner. Seeing Scene's movements, Selena also got up from the ground, picked up her gun, and followed. There's a guy waiting for you down there to ambush you. He's the one who shot at you in the subway, Scene said with a smile when he saw Selena return to her cold female warrior look. How do you know? Selena asked in confusion. She felt that this man was really mysterious. Scene didn't answer her, but pulled up the mesh manhole cover and jumped down. When Scene landed, the man hidden in the shadows immediately jumped out and shot. Bang. Scene looked at the bullet moving slowly in front of him, stretched out his hand to push it away, then walked to the man who seemed to be in slow motion and strangled his neck in the same way. When Selena jumped down from the well, the man who was strangled by Scene was transforming because of the pain in his throat and wanted to rely on the power after the transformation to get out of trouble. His chest began to rise and fall, his muscles tightened, his bones made a slight cracking sound, and his bones began to expand outward, pushing up the flesh. His eyes began to turn blue-gray, his ears became pointed, his mouth and nose began to expand forward. His entire head began to deform and lengthen. His skin began to become rough, the color began to turn dark brown, and his hair began to grow and turn black. After witnessing the entire transformation process, Scene slightly exerted force on his tiger's mouth. After a whimper, the werewolf's throat was broken by Scene before he could make his first roar after the transformation. Selena, who had landed, saw the scene in front of her and thought of the scene that she had just been restrained by Scene. She quickly suppressed the idea of a sneak attack in her heart. Bang. Scene threw the dead wolf at Selena's feet. Bang. 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 Selena immediately kept shooting at him. TSK. This girl is a bit violent. Chapter 61. The Fearful and Shrinking Death Walker. Who are you? Selena's eyes turned blue and stared at Scene. She thought this man was really strange. If he was a normal person in the subway station before, he would have been scared like those humans who ran away with their heads in their hands. She thought at first that this man was standing there because he was scared. Now it seems that Scene is very skilled and brave, and he didn't take the gunfight seriously at all. When Scene restrained him just now, He asked why vampires were not afraid of Silver, instead of asking what species she was, which shows that Scene knew she was a vampire. And just now Scene killed a werewolf with his own hands, and he didn't have any characteristics of a werewolf. A person who knows vampires, but doesn't understand vampires, is not a werewolf, and has strong strength. Selena even thought that, if Scene's identity was not a problem, maybe she could win him over. I've already said it. Scene turned his head and looked into the depths of the passage. Selena knew the name Scene said, but Selena wanted to know Scene's origin and identity. But before Selena could continue to ask questions, Scene began to walk into the passage. Wait, Selena quickly followed. She thought Scene had discovered something. In the semi-arched underground passage, Scene walked slowly forward, just like taking a walk in his own backyard. Selena followed Scene step by step. She just asked Scene where he was going, but got no response. Logically, she should return to their vampire base to report the situation, because she just got their weapons from the werewolf that Scene killed. She found that the werewolf no longer only used its sharp teeth and claws to attack as before. The magazines pulled out of the large caliber pistol were full of bullets with purple light. The companions who had just died tragically in the subway died under this kind of bullets and were burned to death. Selena was shocked and anxious about the changes in the werewolf clan. In the past, werewolves have always been hunted by vampires, and countless werewolves have died in her hands over the years. But now the werewolves suddenly started to fight back, and they were caught off guard. Such important information, she had to report it quickly, otherwise more companions would die tragically. But because of Scene, she was still circling in this dark underground. What's wrong? Seeing Scene suddenly stop, Selena clenched the double guns in her hands reflexively. She thought Scene had discovered something. Scene did find it, but it was not an attack. Just to the right of the two of them, there was an iron fence, and on the other side of the fence was the maintenance point of the underground transportation project. This ancient city was full of various drainage and underground projects, and had many abandoned and uninhabited dark corners. Listen. Scene's eyes looked through the fence and looked at the top of the opposite inspection port, where there was a ventilation pipe opening. What? To listen to? Selena looked at the direction Scene was looking at in confusion. In her field of vision, there was no one on the other side of the fence. Listen carefully. The howling of the beasts fighting, the shouting and cursing of the onlookers. Scene reminded. If someone else said this, Selena might call him a lunatic and walk away, but after Scene showed his power twice in front of her, she had a deep understanding of Scene's ability. Selena closed her eyes and soon heard the sounds Scene said on the other side of the fence. Those were the roars of werewolves. There were also a lot of cheers and curses. There are quite a few people. Scene's eyes saw a fight between werewolves going on above their fence through the thick and solid concrete. Selena opened her blue eyes in shock. Her pupils shrank slightly, and her eyes were full of disbelief. In her cognition, for so many years, the Deathwalker squad formed by their noble and intelligent vampire clan has been hunting werewolves continuously, and there should not be such a large number of werewolves gathering. But what did she hear? Today, at least dozens or hundreds of werewolves gathered together, and their voices were full of wantonness and joy, just like a group of animals enjoying a group life. How is this possible? Do you want to go and see? Scene said with a smile. Selena's beautiful eyes widened again. Even though she was the most powerful Deathwalker in the tribe, if she faced nearly 10 werewolves alone, the opponent could easily kill her with the advantage of numbers. And how many did she just hear? At least dozens or hundreds of werewolves. Although Scene was powerful, Selena couldn't believe him at all. Selena even doubted whether Scene deliberately led her to this place to feed those werewolves with her. Forget it. Look at how scared you are. Scene smiled and shook his head. It was just a group of wild beasts. He could kill them with a wave of his hand. Selena was a little embarrassed. She didn't expect that she, who was always proud of her identity as a Deathwalker in their vampire tribe, would also be afraid and shrink, and in front of a stranger. Just when Selena wanted to explain that the enemy was too numerous, Scene spoke again. Let's go. Where? Scene tilted his head and looked at the somewhat confused leather jacket beauty. Of course we retreat. You don't dare to go up. After saying that, He began to walk towards the exit of the passage. Selena wanted to go right away, but when she thought of the werewolves in groups, I still have to go back to report important intelligence, not because I'm afraid. She could only comfort herself in her heart. When she looked up again, scene was gone. Selena entered the passage and looked around, searching everywhere, from left to right, but she couldn't find scene. Standing in the passage, looking at the large caliber pistol she got from the werewolf, she even wondered if she was dreaming. Until Selena came out of the passage and walked to her car, she was still wondering whether the encounter with Scene just now was real or an illusion. The group of werewolves who were fighting in the passage were shot by a long-haired man who suddenly appeared and stopped their beastly behavior. Luckian put down his gun and looked at the group of werewolf companions who were also his men. He felt disgusted with their behavior, but helpless. He knew that this was due to the beastly nature of the werewolves a few hundred years ago. Werewolves had no ability to transform into humans. All werewolves were in wolf form, without advanced intelligence, and were killed by vampires like wild beasts, and even kept as pets. Luckian was the first werewolf born in human form, and he opened a new era for werewolves, and soon, Luckian would lead the werewolves to a high level. After a round of admonition and encouragement, Luckian left the gathering place of his men. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Vampire Feast. Scene held up a black umbrella transformed from a three-pointed double-edged sword and walked forward with his slender legs in the rain. No one noticed that no drop of rain could wet his body, not even the water droplets splashing on the ground. Thinking about the group of vampires and werewolves he met this time, Scene felt that they seemed to be different from the group that appeared in New York before. Although they were all vampires, the group of vampires in New York did not seem to have the characteristics of blue pupils when they appeared. I don't know where his little blood servant Nisha is now. Should I go to play with her? At this time, Nisha was following the invited Blade, and beside her was the Blood Alliance team that their vampire empire had been practicing for 2.5 years. Interestingly, this Blood Alliance team that had been practicing for 2.5 years was used to deal with Blade. Unexpectedly, they had the opportunity to cooperate now. Because of the alien mutant. The two sides who were supposed to fight to the death naturally met with sarcasm and mutual provocation. As a result, Blade planted a small silver nitrate bomb on the back of the head of the overly arrogant Blood Alliance team leader Reinhardt. Although the bomb was small, it was powerful. In addition, silver nitrate was deadly to vampires, so Reinhardt had to temporarily submit to Blade. The group walked into the largest existing blood bank in the vampire empire with a reckless pace. Because of the attack of the mutants on the blood bank, they were ready to wait and see. Basically, every blood bank is a gathering place for a large number of vampires. As soon as they entered, they could see vampires dressed in various styles. As the iron gate rose, Blade saw a group of vampires at a carnival party. Dynamic music, raised hands, shaking bodies, and cheering and screaming from time to time. Ah, you fucking kidding me? Blade cursed. He thought the blood bank was a well-defended and orderly military place, but he didn't expect it to be a party feast. Blade frowned slightly as he looked at the vampires eating in the blood bank. His conditioned reflex made him want to draw his sword and turn these fallen species into ashes one by one. But Nisha had already told him in advance before entering the door, and they had a more important purpose for this trip, hunting mutants. Holding back his eager hands, Blade and the others separated to search around. A male and female vampire put blades into each other's mouths, and then began to hug and bite each other. Blood flowing down their lips that kept touching. There was also a bald man who was holding a knife behind a vampire whose skin was cut open and cutting his back, and the vampire seemed to feel no pain. There were even a few vampires who just started to hug each other and move, and it was a few against one. Blade walked to the side with disdain and attached the macro camera in his hand to the pillar behind him while contacting the support of the Scud outside. Outside the building, the sprinter in the van received the images from the camera. He looked at the revelry of the vampires and greeted Whistler on the roof of another building with a smile on his face. It was raining outside, and he was very comfortable in the covered van. Whistler responded with a spit. He held a large caliber sniper rifle in one hand and supported an asbestos tile removed from the roof with the other hand. Whistler had planned to go in with Blade. He didn't trust the vampires at all, even though they were in a cooperative relationship now. Unfortunately, Blade asked him to support outside. Whistler, with a frown on his face, didn't dare to let down his guard. He always felt that there was something wrong, but he didn't know where the problem was. Suddenly, Whistler noticed a figure that was out of tune with the whole scene in front of him. A man in a suit holding a black umbrella was walking slowly next to the building opposite. Whistler keenly noticed the man's unique temperament. He was different from those low-level vampires who were drunk and dreaming, and he was also different from those vampire nobles who claimed to be noble. To be honest, Whistler felt that he was more like a human. Watching the black figure put away his umbrella and enter the building opposite, Whistler felt that he had seen it wrong. If he was not a vampire, why did he come to the gathering place of vampires? Scene put away his umbrella and just stepped into the building. The next second, he had passed through the guards and the iron gate that was not opened at all and appeared in the middle of the carnival vampire group. Damn, the taste is really strong. Scene looked at the bald man who was removing bones or cutting meat for people and curled his lips in disdain. This group of vampires is a perfect interpretation of what it means to be full and have nothing to do. The long life makes them gradually degenerate, and they only know how to enjoy themselves and live a life of drunkenness and dream. Because of Scene's unique dress and temperament, several female vampires with smoky makeup couldn't help but approach him. The most outrageous thing was that two sturdy male vampires actually looked at him with a lewd smile. Scene snapped his fingers lightly, and his figure instantly disappeared in the middle of several female vampires who were constantly flirting around him, leaving several female vampires looking at each other in confusion, not knowing what happened. Standing in the middle of a group of dancing vampires on the stage, like a sculpture's Blade. He glanced in the direction where Scene disappeared. Was there someone there just now? Nisha walked up the stairs on both sides to the second floor, ignoring the few vampires on the stairs who looked like they had lost all hope. Nisha came to the second floor and carefully observed any possible disturbance. The corridor full of European style was empty. Suddenly, a black figure turned out at the end of the corridor. Nisha took out the double guns on her waist and aimed at the target like a frightened bird. Wow, is this how you welcome your master? It's quite special, but I don't like it very much. Little maid. Scene didn't care about the double guns pointed at him at all and looked at Nisha, who was surprised at the other end of the corridor with a smile on his face. Why are you here? Nisha asked. The next second, Scene stood in front of Nisha. Seeing Nisha, who took 2 steps back because of his speed, Scene grabbed her wrist holding the gun and gently pulled it. Nisha's delicate body under the leather coat immediately stuck in front of him. What? Don't welcome your master? Scene raised his eyebrows and looked down at her. Nisha smelled the smell on Scene's body. She could feel the heat of Scene's body through several layers of clothes. That weird feeling climbed up her body again. Forced to not fall into that strange feeling, Nisha took a step back and looked up at Scene. No, it's just that I'm on a mission now. Nisha's pale face actually showed a faint pink. Mission? Is it about those mutants you mentioned? Scene asked thoughtfully. He had heard Nisha talk about it in the bar before. Yes. Scene opened his ears and he did hear the movements of several special creatures, which were different from the vampires and ordinary people in this building. One of them actually went around behind him. It seems that someone else is looking for you. Scene raised his mouth and looked at Nisha. Nisha heard the voice behind her and immediately turned around. It was Blade. What's wrong? Blade noticed that Nisha seemed a little strange. He thought Nisha had encountered something. Nisha shook her head and looked back again. Scene's figure was gone. Chapter 63 Alien Invasion. Nisha looked at the corridor, which was empty again. Did she just have an illusion? Did you see anyone just now? Nisha looked into the corridor, looking for Scene's figure, and asked Blade, who? Have you found any traces of mutants? Blade said as he walked towards the corridor. It's really an illusion? Nisha muttered softly. She saw Blade go into the corridor to check the rooms on both sides, shook her head, and walked forward to start checking with Blade. Nisha put down the ladder in the patio took out the strong flashlight, took a deep breath, and was about to climb up to the attic to check if there were any traces of mutants. After shining a circle, she found nothing. Suddenly, she felt that there seemed to be movement at the corner at the end of the corridor beside her. She stepped back 2 steps from the ladder and turned to the left to look at the curtain at the corner. Lifting the curtain, Nisha walked in and quickly checked the piled up items inside. She didn't find any suspicious hiding places. She placed a camera on the wall lamp on one side. There was another entrance and exit in this corridor. Maybe a mutant would pass through here. Hugh. Just as Nisha was about to leave and continue searching in other places, accompanied by a strong wind, a black shadow wearing a worn black windbreaker rushed up. Nisha looked at the hairless and dark yellow skin mutant in front of her in horror. Even the blue blood vessels under the skin were clearly visible, densely spread on his scalp. At such a close distance, she was still controlled by the mutant. Nisha couldn't help but think of all kinds of miserable situations. After being bitten. The mutant looked at Nisha with his mouth covered. He resisted the bloodthirsty desire in his heart and didn't rush to bite her and inject his toxin into her white neck to infect this high-ranking female vampire into a member of his mutant army. At the same time that Nisha was controlled, the Blood Alliance teams in various directions were attacked by the mutants in the dance floor of the hall. The bald man Reinhardt, with a micro bomb planted on the blade on the back of his head, looked at the carnival feast of these low-level vampires with an unhappy face. Because of the dynamic music in the hall and the bodies swaying back and forth around him, Reinhardt, who had been practicing for 2.5 years, did not notice the ugly figure approaching quietly behind him. Just when the ugly mutant tentatively stretched out its sharp claws to the captain of the Blood Alliance team wearing sunglasses. Bang bang bang. Tuba, who was not far from Reinhardt, found the mutant less than half a meter behind him and immediately raised the automatic rifle in his hand to shoot. Reinhardt, who reacted, also turned around and raised the spray gun in his hand to shoot. Being hit by silver bullets at such a close distance, both vampires and humans should have lost their ability to move long ago. But the mutant was only suppressed for a short time and then burst into a piercing wail and began to flee to the side. After the gunshots, the entire dance floor in the hall immediately became chaotic. These low-level vampires are nothing but drunkenness, and they are like ordinary humans, running around with their heads in their hands, running for their lives towards the gradually opening iron gate. The priest, another member of the Blood Alliance team, is even more useless after the gunfight broke out. The vampires in the dance floor around him began to flee outside. When he felt something was wrong behind him, he turned around and fired 2 shots at the mutant that suddenly appeared. As a result, the mutant who was holding his bullets grabbed the hand that fired the gun. With a scream in his mouth, the priest looked at the mutant who was stronger than him in surprise, pinching his right hand holding the gun so that he couldn't play any role at all. Even the left fist he swung out was grabbed by the mutant again, and the sharp nails pierced his wrist deeply. We were attacked. There are at least 3 mutants, and there may be more. Be careful. After receiving the warning from the headset, the snowman, wearing a vest-style samurai armor and shoulder guards, carried his samurai sword and moved his eyes left and right with an indifferent look to distinguish the fleeing vampires. The snowman stopped and he felt the murderer Sora behind him. Carrying the samurai sword and turning around, the snowman looked at the black shadow with a hood staring at him not far away, who was different from the vampires fleeing around him. Seeing the black shadow take off the hood to reveal the scalp without a trace of hair and full of blood vessels, it was a mutant. The snowman calmly held the long sword, rushed towards the mutant who was also running towards him, and kicked 3 times in the air, landing gracefully, kicking the mutant lying on the ground, and looking at him with an angry roar. After the mutant slapped the ground and stood up, the snowman held the scabbard katana with both hands and chopped it with force. Unfortunately, the mutant's strength, speed and reaction were no worse than his, and he just took it with both hands. The snowman took advantage of the situation to draw out the katana, and the blade flashed instantly. The mutant swayed left and right, jumped and dodged, and finally held the blade of the katana that the snowman chopped down with both hands again. After just a moment of surprise, the snowman took advantage of the situation to draw the sword, and the sharp blade cut the mutant's palm, causing him to howl in pain. The mutant was not completely without intelligence. He knew that the snowman's long sword was sharp, so he dodged and moved around to avoid the snowman's blade, and from time to time he made a series of beast-like sounds to provoke point. Seeing the mutant leaping down from the wall and flying towards him, Zunan did not retreat but advanced, turning around and flipping his long sword and stabbing back. The sharp samurai sword immediately penetrated the mutant's body and nailed him to the wall point. As if feeling that his movements were restricted, the mutant grabbed the wall behind him with both hands and climbed up the wall with his feet point. Because of his movements, the samurai sword nailed to the wall tore his body from his belly downwards, but he didn't care about the pain at all. This crazy escape behavior made Zunan's balls hurt, and he couldn't help but clamp his legs together. The controlled Nisha struggled hard, causing the mutant to hiss at her. Nisha didn't even think about why the mutant didn't bite her in the corridor. Blade, who had finished searching in the next room, felt the movement from Nisha's side. Chat. Normac, Blade, lifted the curtain and looked coldly at the alien mutant, who held Nisha hostage through sunglasses. Daywalker, why do you want to go after me? We have a common enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Or do you want to be my enemy too? Normac didn't understand why Blade, who had always been the most ruthless and fierce vampire hunter, would attack him. But Blade didn't give him a chance to communicate. Nisha gave Blade a look, and while Nomac's attention was on Blade, she kicked him in the air. Nomac, who was kicked by the tip of the shoe, immediately let go of Nisha's neck in pain. Blade lifted his windbreaker and shot a silver bullet at Nomac's head. Chapter 64. The battle is fierce. The bullet exploded at Normac's forehead at close range, and the huge power caused Normac's body to crash into the storage cabinet on the wall behind. Climbing up from the ruins of the storage cabinet, Normac looked at Blade and Nisha with resentment. If there was no reason to keep them, he would have eaten these two guys long ago. Looking at Normac fleeing from the left passage, Nisha wanted to chase him with an angry face. As a noblest blood clan of the Vampire Empire, she has always believed that she is powerful, but she was just held hostage by an alien species. It is a great shame. Oh my god. Blade grabbed Nisha, who wanted to follow Normac. The sun will come out soon. Hearing this, the angry Nisha wished for the first time that she was not a vampire. She angrily hit the air hard and stood there watching Blade's back chasing away with envy. The other two members of the Blood Alliance team, Lightaxe and his little lover Wheelian, were also attacked by alien species. Lightaxe, who was searching in two different directions from Wheelian, looked at the naked skinny mutant in front of him with disdain. He raised the sledgehammer with spikes on one end, swung it and smashed it at the ugly mutant. Crack. Looking at the mutant whose head was almost broken from the neck by the sledgehammer from left to right, Lightaxe weighed his life weapon in his hand and laughed sarcastically. But what happened in the next second made this strong and rough man stunned in place, with an expression of disbelief on his tattooed face. The mutant's head, which was broken and tilted to one side, swayed back automatically, as if it had drunk an energy drink. Crack. 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 The mutant's broken neck made a series of grinding clicks, and the protruding bones under the skin full of blood vessels automatically returned to their positions. What kind of monster are you? Lightaxe looked at the mutant in front of him, who was as ugly and tenacious as Zhao Qiang, with surprise and disgust. Hiss. The mutant didn't answer, but roared to provoke Lightaxe. Whoosh. Whoosh. The sledgehammer with a huge sound of wind chased the mutant's thin body. Hearing the news from the earphone, knowing that other members of the team were also attacked, Lightaxe seized the opportunity and turned the hammerhead to hit the mutant's chest. The long spikes immediately pierced the mutant's body full of bones, and the huge kinetic energy caused the mutant to be smashed out. Looking at the mutant lying on the ground motionless, Lightaxe moved over carefully. There was a wound on the chest and abdomen of the mutant that was about the size of a round bottle cap. Lightaxe looked at the sticky liquid coming out of the wound strangely, but there was no trace of blood. What made him even more curious was that the spikes on his sledgehammer were made of silver. So why didn't this mutant be burned to death by the silver? After smelling the liquid on the wound on his hand, Lightaxe shook his hand with disgust. Hiss. The mutant lying on the ground suddenly jumped up, as if resurrecting a corpse, stretched out his hands towards the nearby Lightaxe, and his sharp nails deeply engraved into the back of Lightaxe. Light. Axe felt the pain on his back penetrating into his flesh, and at the moment when the mutant jumped up, he stretched out his hands to hold the mutant's bony chest. Hiss. The sharp cry filled Light Axe's ears. There was a thin line on the mutant's jaw that went straight down from the lips. When he jumped onto Light Axe's body, he stepped on Light Axe's legs with his feet as a fulcrum and used the claws that were deeply embedded in Light Axe's back to exert force, trying to get close to Light Axe's neck. The thin line that looked like a scar suddenly opened, and the entire jaw exposed, the entire mouth like wings inside the mouth. A snake-like mouthpart was aimed at Light Axe, and the tip of the mouthpart was divided into 4 petals like a flower intestine, and several tentacles drilled out from it. Such a disgusting scene made Guang Fu's scalp numb, and the pain deep in his back reminded him not to let go. But Guang Fu didn't expect that the mutant didn't care about the damage he suffered. He desperately stretched his head forward, even though Guang Fu's arms supporting his chest pushed his bones out of the flesh behind him without any hesitation. The mutant's cracked jaw stung the side of Guang Fu's neck. Letting out a painful scream, Guang Fu felt his own strength gradually fading. He knelt on the ground. His hands were no longer able to resist the mutant's attack. Just when he thought he was going to die, his little lover Willian finally rushed over from the other side. She saw her lover entangled by the mutant and immediately shot. The mutant who was shot no longer lingered on Guang Fu, and he had injected toxins into Guang Fu's body. "Dear, are you okay?" Willian saw that the mutant was driven away by her, so she ran to her lover and asked with concern, "It's okay, just a little wound on the back." Guang Fu looked at Willian, who was checking his injuries, pulled the leather armor on his body to cover the wound on the right side of his neck, and did not say the fact that he was bitten. The worst priest in the dance hall was also bitten beyond recognition by the mutant. Assad, who rushed over, saw the priest being pressed against the wall and bitten by the mutant, and immediately shot to rescue him, but it was too late. Reinhardt was quite effective. He and Chuba cooperated to drive the mutant who attacked them away. Chuba stood under the dance floor, holding an automatic rifle in one hand and firing like a god, not caring about the low-level vampires on the mutant's escape path. Because they were hit by Chuba's silver bullets, the vampires were instantly burned to ashes, as if their bodies were on fire. Although the silver bullets could not cause the same damage to the mutants as vampires, the damage caused by the bullets still made it too late for him to repair. Ian had walked to the side of the mutant who was seriously injured and collapsed on the ground with a heartless step. Seeing the mutant still struggling to raise his hand to grab him, Reinhardt smiled cruelly, raised the spray gun in his hand, and shot out the silver spikes installed on the spray gun, nailing the mutant's hand to the wall. At this time, the Scud who was supporting outside the building reported in the headset that these guys were afraid of ultraviolet rays. When Reinhardt heard Scud's voice, he immediately looked cruelly at the ugly creature on the ground, who was still struggling with his hand nailed by him. He opened the flashlight cover on the spray gun, and the light in the flashlight immediately switched to ultraviolet light. Sizzle. The light shone on the mutant's body, making a sizzling sound like barbecue. Within 2 seconds, the mutant burst into a strong wail, and a blue flame ignited under the ultraviolet light. Chapter 65 Tragic Life. Blade chased Nomak, who was shot in the head by him, to a large hole in the building. In the center of the hall, there was an abandoned scaffold several meters high. He walked along the scaffold toward the center, searching for Nomak. Just when he thought he had lost Nomak's trace and put away his gun, Nomak jumped onto the scaffold and came a few meters behind him. "Do you want to find me so much, Blade?" Nomak, panting, angrily looked at the daywalker who should have stood on the same front with him. The gunshot wound on his forehead was recovering little by little, and the speed of self-healing was visible to the naked eye, faster than the recovery speed of vampires. "Why did you come to kill me? We have a common enemy and a common goal," Nomak said as he approached Blade. Blade was too lazy to talk nonsense with him, and his fists clenched and cracked. The two of them were about to fight. "Is this the hunting team you trained for 2.5 years? Scene leaned against the wall and looked at Nisha, who was standing there venting her anger alone. "You." Nisha turned around and looked at Scene, who suddenly appeared. She really thought she was hallucinating just now. At this time, SYN appeared again, and she finally confirmed SYN's existence. Hearing SYN mocking the Blood Alliance team carefully cultivated by their vampire empire, Nisha wanted to retort, but thinking of SYN's mysterious methods and the battle situation, where the Blood Alliance team was caught off guard just now, Nisha could only give up this idea. Give you a friendly reminder. Think about why the mutant has caught you, but didn't attack you. He shouldn't have let go of such a good opportunity just now. Hearing SYN's words, Nisha frowned, and the anger in her heart was gradually replaced by doubts. Yes, why didn't that guy bite me just now? What? Do you know? Nisha looked up at SYN, who reminded her. What? Can I know? I just came here, and I just heard what you said about the mutants. Since he has been attacking your vampire clan, why did he let you go just now? Is it because you are beautiful? Although you are really beautiful, I don't think mutants will be unable to walk when they see beautiful women. SYN said jokingly. When Nisha heard SYN praising her beauty, a blush suddenly appeared on her face, but she quickly suppressed it. She thought about what SYN said and recalled the previous attacks by mutants. Indeed, every vampire was immediately attacked and transformed by them when they encountered mutants. The news from the Blood Alliance team in the headset was the same. But why didn't Normak bite her just now? Is it really as SYN said? Is there any special reason? While Nisha was thinking, Blade had finished fighting with Normak. Normak was not afraid of silver objects, and even anticoagulants had little effect on him. He was strong and fast, so Blade could not take him down. Why? Didn't you tell me that these mutants were not afraid of silver objects? Blade, who came back, asked Nisha. Nisha looked back at Blade, who was questioning in his tone. We don't know either. When she reacted and looked back, SYN was gone again. What on earth was this damn guy doing here? He didn't know how to help. At this time, SYN was watching Normak, who had escaped from Blade with interest. In the dark and dirty underground, Normak was closing his eyes and enduring the desire for blood in his body. It was this desire that had been tormenting him, making him unable to resist hunting and eating, and the vampires or humans he had bitten would be transformed into carriers of his virus. Who are you? Normak noticed SYN's arrival, and he looked at the man who suddenly appeared in front of him with vigilance. SYN's suit was out of tune with the dirtiness of the underground. If I hadn't become like this, I would probably be as noble and elegant as him. Normak couldn't help thinking. Shaking his head, Normak threw his unrealistic thoughts out of his mind, screamed, and immediately several mutants rushed out of the sewage and pounced on SYN. No matter who he was, he needed blood to recover from his injuries, so Normak attacked SYN. With a clang, SYN held the 3-pointed two-edged sword, swung his arm, and the blade cut through the pale monsters, splitting them in half, and the monsters were immediately burned to ashes. SYN placed the elongated 3-pointed two-edged sword on the ground, and the golden red eternal fire flowing on the blade illuminated the dark sewer like daylight. Those monsters lurking in the sewage and pipes would be burned to ashes by the sun like light if they ran a little slower. Normak was also burned and hid in the shadows on the side. Until the golden red eternal fire shrank back to the diamond shaped part of the blade. Normak still did not dare to come out of the shadows, but at this moment he no longer dared to have any disrespectful thoughts towards SYN, and looked at SYN with fear. Get out, under SYN's command. Normak trembled and crawled out on his knees on the ground, not even daring to raise his head. Great existence, please forgive my disrespectful behavior just now. Normak trembled and begged SYN for forgiveness. Who are you? SYN's voice echoed in the sewer, sounding like the whisper of a god, making Normak more certain that this mysterious man was of great origin. I am the son of Ellie Damaskinus, the ruler of the vampire empire. My name is Chad Normak Damaskinus. Hearing SYN's question, Normak did not dare to hide anything. He was afraid that if he said something wrong, he would be burned to death by SYN's divine fire. He also wanted to keep this painful body to take revenge. You mean you are Nisha's brother? Yes, sir. Nisha is my sister. Normak nodded quickly. He heard SYN mention Nisha's name and thought they knew each other, which made him dare not hide anything from SYN. You are also a vampire? Then how did you become like this? SYN was puzzled. I used to be a vampire, and now I don't know what I am. Normak's tone was painful and self-deprecating. My Father, Ellie Damascus, conducted human experiments on me in the name of the future of the vampire clan, hoping to find a way to make us evolve perfectly. Unfortunately, all he got was a monster that was neither human nor ghost and full of hatred. Nomic's voice was full of resentment and hatred for his father. So, you want to retaliate against him? That's why you keep attacking the vampire clan? Yes, sir. Then, why do you attack humans? The tip of the three-pointed double-edged knife was against Nomic's hairless head. Nomic trembled all over and didn't dare to move at all. Sir, I attack some humans who do dirty work in the dark. I can't appear in the sun during the day. The dirty work that Nomic said is actually gangsters. People who sell white powder or prostitutes. Scene didn't see it with his own eyes, and he couldn't tell the truth of Nomic's words. Even so, your existence has posed a threat to humans. Chapter 66. If you are threatened, just blink. Feeling the murderous intent in Scene's words, Nomic panicked. He didn't care about the three-pointed double-edged sword hanging over his head and cut out desperately to beg Scene, "My lord, please give me a little more time. Please take my life after I succeed in revenge. In addition, my father is now committed to studying how to make vampires no longer afraid of sunlight. If he really succeeds, at that time, vampires will be the biggest threat to humans." Hearing Nomic's words, Scene thought about it. For him, it made no difference whether vampires were afraid of sunlight or not. In front of him, these creatures had no power to fight back. But if they really succeeded in their research, vampires would definitely invade human society in large numbers, and it would become more troublesome for S.H.I.E.L.D. to solve the problem. Besides, he came here this time to accept Nick Fury's money to solve the problem of vampires or just kill Ellie Damascus directly. After thinking for a while, Scene decided to give this miserable guy a chance. Anyway, he wanted to seek revenge on his father Ellie Damascus, so let them fight, but the damage range should be controlled within the vampire. I won't kill you now, you can go for revenge. Hearing Scene's words, Nomic finally let go of his hanging heart. The revenge factor was flowing in his blood. For him now, only by killing his father who made him like this with his own hands, can his pain be relieved. But you can't let the fight between you affect humans. If you can't control your mutants, then I will help you control them. Do you understand what I mean? Of course, Nomic knew what Scene meant by helping him control the mutants that had been burned to ashes on the ground in the dark. So a worthy answer. Yes, sir. I will never let my mutants hurt any human. After getting Scene's permission, Nomic excitedly vowed to Scene. Nisha and Blade returned to the dance floor in the hall, where the Blood Alliance team had gathered. Half of the priest's face and neck were covered with bloody wounds caused by the mutants. At this moment, he was being pressed to the ground by Chuba and Assad, struggling and screaming in pain. Shit. His body is getting hotter and hotter. Chuba, who was holding down one of the priest's arms with all his strength, said as he looked at the priest's painful appearance. Reinhardt paced back and forth impatiently beside him, listening to the screams in the tomb. Blade walked over and looked at the priest who was being held down by two people on the ground and asked, "How long has he been bitten?" "About 20 minutes. Assad raised his head and answered. At this moment, Chuba's hand holding the priest's head pulled off a bunch of his hair, and the priest, who was still struggling and wailing desperately, didn't feel anything at all. He has begun to transform. Blade's implication was that the priest was no longer safe. Who the hell can make him shut up? Reinhardt understood what Blade meant and cursed impatiently. "Ah. Kill me. Kill me quickly. Chuba." The priest also shouted at Chuba. Seeing this, Chuba had no choice but to take out his pistol and put it against the priest's chest. He closed his eyes, recited 2 prayers, and then pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. The large caliber pistol bullets hit the priest's chest and abdomen, and blood flew everywhere. But what everyone didn't expect was that the priest's lips began to split, as if they were cut by a sharp blade. Just as the split was completed, the priest's entire jaw suddenly opened, and he made a sharp cry, while struggling to attack Chuba and Assad, who were closest. Fortunately, the two of them were quick to press the priest to the ground again, otherwise there would be 2 more casualties. Just as Assad and Chuba were struggling to suppress the mutated priest, Reinhardt kicked over the table next to him. "That's enough. Hurry up and give him a quick death, Zoo. Nan couldn't stand it anymore. After all, he was his teammate, but now he looked like this. He pulled out the samurai sword in his hand and handed it to Reinhardt. Swish. Reinhardt took the samurai sword and cut off half of the priest's head. His walnut-like brain was exposed to everyone's viewpoint, but even so, the priest's body was still struggling. Get out of the way. Blade knew that other methods would probably not kill him. He understood that the Blood Alliance wanted to keep the priest's body, but the current situation obviously did not allow them to do so. He stepped on the priest's chest and suppressed the body with only half of his head still moving. Blade took out his gun and pointed it at the wall behind him. Point bang, as Blade fired 2 shots in a row and opened a small hole on the top. The rising sun immediately drilled in along the hole and shone directly on the priest. Chuba, who had no time to dodge, was stabbed on the back of his neck by the sun. Sizzle. The strong ultraviolet rays immediately burned the priest's body into ashes. Chuba touched the burn on his neck while looking at the half of the priest's head that Reinhardt had just cut off with a samurai sword. The eye on the head was still moving and blinked twice when it saw Chuba. This horrifying scene gave Chuba a new understanding of the vitality of this mutant. If you can only do this twice, then we will be in big trouble. Just when everyone was shocked, Whistler walked in while taunting. All the vampires in the building had already run away. Just before everyone was fighting in the building, Whistler and Scud were also attacked by mutants outside, so Scud only knew that ultraviolet rays were a way to deal with mutants. A teammate of ours died. Do you want me to carve his name on your chest? Chuba was in a bad mood after a teammate died. He looked at the old man who spoke so brazenly. Whistler was too lazy to talk nonsense to these blood flukes. He took the blade to the bottom of the building, which was a wellhead of the sewer. Everyone looked at the mutant stuck in the middle of the well. I found traces of the mutant on the building outside before, and then I tracked it here and found that this idiot was stuck here. Whistler pointed to the injury on the mutant's stuck arm and continued, "This guy's like a wild beast." He tried to bite off his arm to escape, but failed. Reinhardt was about to vent his anger on the mutant after his dead teammate, but Nissa stopped him. "He's almost dead. Leave him here. I'm going to dissect him and find out the weaknesses of these mutants." Nissa looked at the dumb mutants who had lost their vitality and held down Reinhardt's gunpoint. After tying up the idiot mutant, Blade pried open the wellhead and went down into the sewer along the wellhead. He knew that Nomak was hiding in this dirty and dark corner. Chapter 67 arrived at the right time. "Speedy, pry open his mouth." Nisha looked at Speedy, who was standing at the head of the dissection table. "Oh, no, sister, there are so many brave vampires here. Why don't you call me a human rookie?" Speedy looked at the ugly body lying on the dissection table and stared at Nisha, who asked him for help. Nisha, holding the tweezers, saw Speedy standing there motionless, tilted her head and urged him again. "Brother Deo." Speedy looked at Blade, who was standing aside and looking cool, hoping that he could help him take on this difficult task. Sissy, who knew that Blade smiled contemptuously, spit out 2 words and had no intention of coming forward to help. Looking at the group of big and strong vampires waiting to watch the show around him, Speedy cursed in his heart. Out. Speedy carefully used both hands to pry open the mutant's split jaw, looking terrified, afraid that this thing would suddenly attack him before it was completely dead. The fangs on both sides are full of neurotoxins. Once bitten, you will slowly lose your resistance. The flower tongue in the middle should be the main injection organ of the virus. Nisha fiddled with the mutant's exposed mouth. "Silver products are useless, and garlic is useless. I think we only have the sun as a weapon, right?" Speedy shook his hands in disdain. After Nisha saw it, he quickly hid far away to prevent this woman from doing anything to him again. "Sunlight is not only deadly to them, but also to us," Nisha said angrily. "If they really used sunlight as a weapon, then the lives of these vampires would be in danger. Let me see if I can find their other weaknesses." After that, Nisha gave Blade and the Blood Alliance team a unique anatomy lesson. She took a scalpel and cut open the lifeless mutant, removing the chest ribs that were connected like armor. The mutant's internal organs were immediately exposed in front of everyone. Reinhardt even whistled at the disgusting scene. "Look here, the heart is actually wrapped in bones. It seems that only the side can be damaged. Nisha knocked on the hard bone arm and Nisha bit her finger and ripped a drop of blood on the exposed internal organs. The whole internal organ system suddenly squirmed, as if it was resurrected. Now everyone finally knows how terrible the vitality of this mutant is. Although they vampires can also enter a dormant state and then be awakened by blood. If they are really dead, their bodies will not react to blood. But this alien mutant is obviously different. The infected priest, before, is a good example. Even if only half of his head is left, he can still exchange glances with Tuba. Tell me if it is terrible or not. In the end, Nisha couldn't find any effective way to restrain the mutant. We'll leave after sunrise. Blade turned coldly. Wait, Assad chased after him. We can't move after sunrise. Blade stopped and turned to look at him. I don't expect anyone to come back alive. Assad was shocked by Blade's idea of dying together with him and was speechless. In fact, he didn't understand Blade at all. Blade was the same as vampires, but different. He didn't have the long life of vampires in Blade's hunting career. He was ready to die with the vampires every time. This was a belief that those vampires who were attached to their long lives could not understand. Your wounds heal quickly, dear. William stroked the claw marks on the back of Lightaxe that were almost recovered. Without noticing the expression on Lightaxe's face, Lightaxe shrugged slightly unnaturally, raised his hand and gently wiped off the yellow pus that slowly flowed from the leather armor covering his neck. Secretly glad that no one noticed. Nisha returned to her room to prepare for the battle. Ahem. I didn't mean it, although he said so. Scene still stared at Nisha's round buttocks and the two small grapes on the towering peaks. He didn't expect that he came at the right time. Nisha was changing clothes. She quickly put on her clothes to cover her beautiful body. Her body was seen by this man, but Nisha was surprised that she didn't want to attack him at all. What are you doing here? Those mutants are so threatening. Are you really not going to attack? Hearing Nisha's question, Scene retracted his penetrating gaze. Well, not bad. I didn't expect that. Although this beautiful girl's skin is not as white as those white people, some parts are actually pink. You seem to have made a mistake. Compared with those mutants, you vampires are more threatening. Nisha reminded, if we let him develop like this, now it's us vampires, and in the future it will be thousands of humans who will be harmed. The situation you said will not happen. Scene waved his hand. Why are you so sure? Nisha was puzzled. Scene did not answer, but tilted his head and looked at Nisha. Seeing Scene's actions, Nisha understood that, as long as he was there, those mutants would be like chickens and dogs, and they would be shattered at the touch of a button, just like what happened in the bar before. Can you help us? Nisha's voice was as soft as a mosquito. If Scene hadn't had excellent hearing, he probably wouldn't have heard it. Nisha's face was covered with blushes. She had never been so humble in front of anyone, except Scene. Especially when she thought about how he had seen her clean just now. She felt like she was acting like a spoiled child with her man. Thinking of this, she felt the leather jacket on her chest was a little rough. You think you are righteous and the one who is right, but you don't know that Normak is a real victim. Scene felt that, if Nisha knew the truth, she might not be so easy to accept. What are you talking about? Nisha looked up at Scene in confusion. Normak killed so many of their kind. How could he be a victim? Everything you are experiencing now is your father's own fault. Nonsense. Don't want to help? Forget it. Even if we rely on ourselves, I can solve this problem. Nisha heard Scene slandering her father and immediately retorted emotionally. In her heart, her father, Eli Damascus, was a godlike existence. He created the powerful vampire empire and never fell into the dormancy that all vampires had to go through. Seeing Nisha angrily change her clothes and walk out, Scene shook his head helplessly. He originally came to remind Nisha, but who knew that this silly girl was still so naive after living for so long, and left without even listening to him finish his words. However, I'm afraid that the Blade Warrior has already discovered something wrong at this moment. Chapter 68, Unsuccessful Mission. In fact, Scene's guess was correct. Blade did feel that something was wrong. Not to mention, why Normak didn't bite Nisha. His determination to take revenge on vampires was intriguing. Normak's mutants, like him, had a strong desire for blood. Driven by this desire, they should attack weaker humans everywhere, instead of being obsessed with attacking vampires that were obviously stronger and not easy to find. However, from Blade's point of view, Nomak was indeed a great threat. These mutants were more difficult to deal with and harder to kill than vampires. Now that the Vampire Empire had found him to cooperate, Blade would be happy to see it happen, no matter who died. Now that it was confirmed that only sunlight was the fastest and most effective method, Whistler and Scud hurriedly made a new type of ultraviolet bomb for everyone. This bomb could release strong ultraviolet light in all directions in an instant, which would not cause any harm to ordinary people and Blade, but would be fatal to mutants and vampires at the same time. In order to block the mutants' sharp claws and teeth, everyone put on a layer of light and strong armor. I have a question. Where do we find those mutants? Chuba asked while pulling the buckle of the armor. We don't have to look for them. They will come to us. Nisha threw something to Chuba. After Chuba took it, he accidentally pressed it and immediately sprayed a mist. Ahem. What the hell is this? Chuba asked in disgust after being choked. Pheromone, extracted from the adrenal glands of the dead mutant. Nisha explained. You going to let us urinate all over our bodies? Rien had complained. First, suppress them with guns, and then throw bombs. Each bomb is set with a 10-second delay, although Blade hoped that all the Blood Alliance teams would die. He still introduced the weapons given by Whistler to them in detail. This is the ultimate weapon I made. I added nitroglycerine to it. Scud was also pointing at the largest box next to him, which contained a bunch of UV bombs. When you use it, be extra careful. You're not going? Nisha looked at Scud. Scud said without blushing or beating his heart. No, I love peace. Nisha pouted speechlessly. Nisha, remember to protect yourself. Blade suddenly said to the female vampire next to him. Hearing Blade's words, Nisha was stunned for a moment. Thinking of the conversation we've seen just now, Nisha thought to herself, look at my body. I begged you so humbly, but you didn't agree. Humph, you don't feel sorry for me, but someone does. You are particularly concerned about that girl. Whistler looked at Blade, who was coming over, and said in a bad tone, if I were you, I wouldn't worry about this. Blade helped Whistler tighten his armor. Among these people, he cared most about Whistler. I see you've been hanging out with them for a long time, and you're a little confused about what you're doing. Whistler complained. He didn't want Blade to have feelings for Nissa, especially since Nissa was a vampire. You've been hanging out with those vampires for 2 years, so you're not qualified to say anything about me. Blade's mouth was as sharp as his sword. He used the fact that Whistler was caught by a vampire to retort. What do you mean by that? Whistler had been hunting vampires all his life, and Blade dared to say that he was hanging out with vampires. This was the biggest insult to him. Seeing that Whistler was about to get angry, Blade quickly changed the subject. Keep close to your friends and stay close to your enemies. I hope you can remember this. Whistler looked at Blade's broken mouth and rolled his eyes. The fully armed and ready people came to the sewer entrance and exit that Whistler had discovered and went down the well into the sewer channel full of sewage and garbage. Blade, the situation here is complicated. Let's search separately and contact each other through the headset if there is any situation. Squatting down to observe the traces of the mutants' activities, Blade agreed to this suggestion. The crowd was divided into 3 groups and searched in 3 directions. The Snowman, Light Axe and Welly Lion slowly moved into the passage. When they reached a fork, Welly Lion left the team alone again. In fact, she had already discovered that her lover was bitten, but she also held a glimmer of hope in her heart, hoping that Light Axe had not changed for such a long time and could resist the toxins of those mutants. Unfortunately, when Welly Lion separated from the 2, Light Axe felt that his body was getting more and more out of control. He looked at the snowman in front of him, and a bloodthirsty desire burst out from his bones. The snowman, holding the samurai sword, noticed the movement of his teammates behind him, but it was too late. Raw, Welly Lion, who had fallen behind, heard the voice from Light Axe. She prayed that it was her beloved who had encountered those mutants again, rather than Light Axe itself, and ran over there with her short legs, not knowing that she was getting closer to death step by step. Blade, who was squatting on the ground and observing, noticed something was wrong and immediately ran towards Nisha and a sad Seeing that the two had stepped into the waist-deep sewage, Blade shouted urgently, "Don't move. Get out of the water, quickly, Nisha." And Assad turned around and looked at Blade with a serious expression and were about to obey and return to the shore. Point bang, 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 bang. As Assad walked deeper, several mutants immediately emerged from the water next to him. "No." Nisha screamed loudly as she looked at Assad, who was thrown into the water and wanted to go to rescue him. Nisha, upon seeing this, Blade immediately went into the water and stopped Nisha, who was about to go up, and sent her away. "Run." Now, Blade pushed Nisha into the passage. In this short period of time, there was no movement on Assad's side, and it was obviously very dangerous. After calming down, Blade looked at the water, took out an ultraviolet bomb, and threw it aside, counting down the time for Nisha, who was running for her life in the passage point. At the moment when the timer cleared, the mutants under the water surface immediately sprang out, and with the irradiation of ultraviolet rays, they were all burned to ashes. Blade was afraid that the bomb was not powerful enough, so he pulled out his long sword and spun around. He hit each one in a circle and picked apart the ashes of the mutated corpses. When Lion, who had short red hair, looked at the monster in front of her that was biting Yukio's body, she couldn't believe that it was her lover. It wasn't until the light axe came out of the shadows and when Lion saw that the familiar faces in the past had turned into those ugly mutants, that she belatedly raised the gun in her hand, only to be hit by the light axe. Lose point without her weapon. Lion turned and ran. When she saw the wellhead above, she made up her mind. Lion reached out and lifted the manhole cover above her head. The sunlight immediately turned her and the light axe who climbed up the ladder with her into ashes. Their dust was blown away by the wind and intertwined. On the other side, Reinhardt and Chuba bullied the old man Whistler together. These two guys had wanted to do this for a long time, but Blade gave them this opportunity and divided them into a group. Seeing that they were no match for each other, Whistler took the opportunity to turn on the device that sprayed pheromones. He was going to attract a large group of mutants. Even if he himself was bitten, he could directly use a wave of bombs to take them away. The two vampires are sent together to meet God. He trained the Blade, and in terms of ruthlessness, Whistler was the originator. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69. The truth comes out. In the fortress of the Vampire Empire. Ellie Damaskinus received the news of the heavy losses from Nisha, but he did not show any concern for his daughter or his men. In this world, some people like money, some like women, and some love both. Ellie Damaskinus prefers powerful vampires, especially higher level vampires like Ellie Damaskinus. They need to enter a dormant state every once in a while. And Ellie Damaskinus has not dormant for hundreds of years. He can't let go of the hot power in his hands. The feeling of holding power makes him intoxicated, even if it makes his appearance more demonic. This is also one of the reasons why he is obsessed with researching the perfect vampire variant. He is not satisfied with the long and infinite life of vampires but with flaws. He wants to have a truly perfect immortality so that he can enjoy power to his heart's content. After learning that despite the heavy losses, it was still in his plan, Ellie Damaskinus stepped into the red pool of blood with confidence. In the sewer, because of the various encounters between Nisha and Blade, more and more mutants gathered towards them. At this time, the two alliances had lost Snowman, Light Axe, Villian and Assad. Even Chuba was bitten beyond recognition by the mutants attracted by Whistler, and the entire team lost more than half. Looking at the hordes of mutants that could not be killed, Blade could only use the ultimate killer prepared by the sprinter for them. The strong ultraviolet rays almost filled the entire sewer space with the help of nitroglycerine. The only two surviving vampires, Nisha and Reinhardt, almost disappeared like the mutants. Nisha saw Reinhardt with half of his face burned black. She was a little surprised. Obviously, the ultraviolet rays she had just faced were no less than Reinhardt's, so why was she not hurt at all? Before she could figure out the answer, Nisha saw Blade, who was running back through the sewer, being electrocuted by a group of men in black who suddenly appeared, and unable to take care of himself. She was about to raise her gun to help Blade, but Reinhardt raised his hand to stop her. Then Nisha saw a familiar face walk out from the group of men in Black Point. That was the royal advisor of her father, Ellie Damascus, a human blood servant. What the hell is going on? Nisha asked. This is all your father's order. The order that Reinhardt received from Ellie Damascus from the beginning was to capture Blade Point. The so-called cooperative hunting of mutants was just a part of Ellie Damascus' plan. Point. Their real purpose was to capture Blade so that they could study the secret of Blade being able to walk in the daylight without any scruples. I'll go back and tell my father. After hearing what Reinhardt said, Nisha could only wait until she got back to plead with her father. After all, Blade saved her life anyway. Take this guy away. Reinhardt shook his head without comment. Point. Nisha was too naive. He knew Ellie Damascus' plan. In his eyes, Blade was dead this time. Thinking of this, Reinhardt kicked Blade, who was still lying on the ground and trying to raise his head, and told him to imitate me wearing sunglasses. Back to the fortress of the Vampire Empire, Nisha immediately ran to her father in a hurry. Father, this operation suffered heavy losses. I disappoint you. Nisha lowered her head. Point. Ellie Damascus did not blame her. After all, his goal was not those mutants at the beginning, but Blade, who had just awakened at this moment. See you again, Daywalker. Ellie Damascus looked at Blade with curiosity and desire in his eyes. This time was different from their first meeting. The first time Ellie Damascus tried to restrain himself in order to pull Blade into the plan. Now that Blade has fallen into his hands, his true colors are exposed. They have been lying to us from the beginning. Whistler, who was also captured, said to Blade, who had just woken up. It turned out that he had just met their target, Nomak, in the sewer, but Nomak did not bite him, but told him all the truth. Point. Hearing Whistler's story, Blade's eyes without sunglasses were wide open, and Ellie Damascus, who was looking at him, also admitted the truth described by Nomak. Like all the villains who like to talk nonsense, Father. Nisha, standing behind Ellie Damascus, looked at the person she admired most in disbelief. Point. She didn't expect her father to be so cold-blooded. In order to achieve his goal, he used his own son to experiment and used his daughter's life to trap the enemy. As long as we get the secret from you, we vampires will no longer have to fear the sun, and we will be able to walk freely in the world. At that time, the whole world will belong to me. Ellie Damascus didn't care about Nisha behind him. He stared at Blade and described his fantasy dream. Take him away. As Ellie Damascus gave the order, Reinhardt and a group of people prepared to give Blade another electrotherapy. You can say goodbye to your head. All the weapons on Blade were confiscated, but he still took out a remote control from his butt pocket, which was used to control the bomb behind Reinhardt's head. Pointing. Ha ha ha. Seeing Blade's confused look, Scud, who had been standing aside, finally couldn't help laughing. He was waiting for this moment. Don't bother, buddy. Scud walked towards Reinhardt and said proudly, how do you think they got the news about us? I have been in contact with them all the time. I have been their man since the beginning. He turned down his lip, revealing the tattoo symbol representing the blood servant inside. Why do you want to do this? Whistler looked at him. Didn't you hear what they just said? Soon vampires will be able to live normally in the sun like humans. What do you think will happen to humans at that time? I would rather be a pet than become their food. As soon as Scud finished speaking, Whistler wished he could shoot this traitorous ghost traitor in the head. Point. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out in the whole hall. I don't know what will happen to humans in the future, but you will die miserably. Who is talking? Reinhardt held up the spray gun in his hand and looked around for the source of the voice. The others also looked around strangely after hearing this. Only Nisha's face recovered from the endless sadness after hearing this voice. Point. Boom. Chapter 70. The atomic bomb is coming. Get out of the way. With a loud noise and countless gravel falling, Scene penetrated the entire fortress from the sky and landed in the center of the whole. Point. Everyone present thought they had been attacked by artillery shells. When the dust slowly dispersed, everyone could clearly see the true face of the fallen cannonball, and the entire venue fell silent. Point. After all, Scene's atomic bomb-like appearance really shocked everyone present and the vampires. Who are you? Ellie Damascus asked calmly. He wanted to find out first whether Scene was a friend or an enemy. Me. I'm here to wake you up. Although it's not illegal to have a sweet dream, it's your fault if you want to turn it into reality. Ellie Damaskinus looked at Scene in confusion, and then immediately realized, did this mean he was here to be his enemy? What else is there to say? Seeing Ellie Damaskinus waving his hand, Reinhardt raised the troll in his hand and shot it. Who the hell are you? Everyone is equal before the troll point as the gunfire rang out. The bullet immediately exploded into a shower of blood point. But what Reinhardt didn't expect was that what he hit was actually a scud. Well, how so? Shouldn't I have the last laugh? Looking at the bloody bullet holes on his chest that were as dense as flowers, Scud didn't understand why he had come here to block the gun just now when he was clearly there. Hearing Scud's howl, Blade sneered and cursed a sissy point. Even if Scud doesn't die, Blade can still kill him. He already knows the fact that Scud is a traitor. Let's see how you can hide now. Reinhardt didn't even look at the fallen Scud. Although he was also surprised why the Scud suddenly changed its position, he wanted to kill Scene first. Point bang. Another shot. Another person from their vampire side jumped out and blocked Scene's bullet. Because Reinhardt's gun was filled with silver bullets, the vampire who rushed to block the gun immediately turned into ashes. Reinhardt went crazy when he saw this, spraying bullets at Scene one after another. Bang bang bang. Every time a shot was fired, a vampire rushed out of nowhere to block Scene's shot. Point both Blade and Whistler looked confused at this strange scene point. If Ellie Damaskinus hadn't ordered Reinhardt to kill Scene, and Reinhardt had an angry look on his face, they would have thought that Scene was the real person in charge of the vampires. How else could they explain it? This is a vampire who has two people standing in front of him to block the gun. Point click, click, click. It wasn't until the bullets in the gun ran out that Reinhardt reacted. What the hell kind of monster are you? Scene smiled after hearing Reinhardt's words. A monster? First look at the thing behind you. That is neither a human nor a ghost. Scene pointed at Ellie Damaskinus. I am the most noble master of the vampire empire. You wild boy who came out of nowhere. Seeing Scene pointing at him, Ellie Damaskinus felt insulted. Father, Nisha heard her father speak rudely to Scene and thought of Scene's mysterious methods. Although her father made her very sad, she still stopped her subconsciously, not wanting her father to offend Scene, and to prevent her father from being raped by Zyro. N was killed. Shut up. But Ellie Damaskinus thought that Nisha was contradicting him, and shouted sharply without looking back. Point Scene's expression gradually changed from a smile to a serious one. Point Nisha is his blood slave after all. What right do you, an inhuman old monster like you, have to treat her like this? Nisha, come here. Scene said after seeing Nisha's aggrieved look after being scolded by her father. Oh, who do you think you are? Nissa is my daughter. How can I stand on your side? Ellie Damaskinus seemed to have heard a big joke when he heard Scene's words. However, before he could finish his words, he saw Nissa walking out of his peripheral vision and slowly moving forward. You. Ellie Damaskinus looked at his baby daughter in disbelief. Okay, I didn't expect you to betray me like your good-for-nothing brother. This kid is the concubine you found outside, right? You want to take my power. You are still young. Ellie Damaskinus looked at Nisha angrily and said point he didn't care about Nissa or Namak at all. To him, since he had an infinite lifespan, it didn't matter what heirs were. As long as he wanted to. When couldn't he have one? When Nessa heard these words, her body trembled. She looked back at her demon-like father and suddenly felt what her brother Namak was feeling. Point I think her brother must have regarded his father as an object of worship, and that's why he agreed to let him conduct such horrific experiments on himself. Point Scene gently stroked Nessa's head. Do you still remember what you said when we first met? Scene didn't mention a blood contract. On this occasion, he still wanted to give his little maid some face. Point Nessa looked at Scene in confusion with tears in her eyes, not knowing what he was referring to. Since that old guy said so, wouldn't you be very sorry if you didn't seize his power? Scene said with a chuckle, as if seizing power was nothing more than a piece of cake to him. Point Ellie Damaskinus laughed when he heard this. If his power was so easy to take away, he would have died countless times in the past few hundred years. Although he is like this, he is still my father after all. Nisha looked at Scene, but she didn't say the rest of the words, but Scene understood what he meant. It doesn't matter. someone will naturally come to settle accounts with him. You just need to be ready to take over your vampire empire. Heh. The more he talked, the more outrageous it became. Ellie Damascus smiled disdainfully. No one knew about his fortress at all. Now the fortress was full of his people. Even if you don't know how to kill the vampires in the hall, so what point? But Ellie Damascus didn't think about how Scene appeared here. Although Scene's method could not be copied, other people naturally had their own methods at this time. Scene had heard the approaching footsteps of the Revenge, and the Blade, who had been standing there without saying anything, suddenly smiled and showed his big white teeth. What are you laughing at? Whistler was still kept in the dark. We are about to witness a wonderful revenge. Blade waved his hand to brush off the pheromones that were still on his body. His two snow-white fangs were particularly dazzling against his dark skin, which made his smile look a little funny. Father, just when Ellie Damascus was about to call his men to deal with the idiots in the hall, a roar of anger came over Ellie Damascus. Suddenly became a little flustered for no reason. His eyes looked through Scene and the others to the door of the hall. A bloodthirsty figure in slovenly clothes was eating his men, who he relied on one by one. After he dealt with some of the security, he looked up and immediately saw Ellie Damascus in the hall. Hey, the slowly closing mouth pits were covered with the blood of countless people, making Nomic's already ugly face look even more terrifying. Chapter 71. It's hard to persuade a vampire. Nessa saw Nomic again. Her eyes no longer held the previous hostility. Knowing the inside story, she had complicated emotions towards her brother, who had suffered such a misfortune. On the one hand, she sympathized with her blood relationship, and on the other hand, she sympathized with her vampire. From the perspective of the clan, she needs to solve this scourge again. Yes, Nessa has now begun to consider herself the master of the vampire empire. In her opinion, with Scene's help and her bloodline status, taking over the vampire empire is just a natural thing. Her father, Reinhardt, and the fortress guards were nothing more than playthings that could be destroyed in the hands of her blood contract master, Father Nomix. Growling continued, and the hateful voice echoed in Ellie Damascus's ears like the whispers of Satan. Taking advantage of everyone's attention being attracted by the intruding Nomic, Ellie Damascus, escorted by Reinhardt, evacuated to his usual living place, where he had a specially designed means of escape. Since this fortress is no longer safe and secretive, let's move to another one. Anyway, as long as he is alive, it doesn't matter who dies. At most, it just takes more time to cultivate. Turning to look at Ellie Damascus fleeing back, Scene did not step forward to stop him. Someone would do it for him. Blade naturally also noticed the actions of Ellie Damascus and Reinhardt. Even though he lost all his weapons, he still chased after him. He still had to settle the accounts with them. That's it. How about running away? Just after Blade followed, Nomic, who defeated the fortress guards, also passed through the hall, but when he passed by Scene, he bowed to Scene humbly, and then glanced at his sister Nisha, turned around and left without hesitation. Whistler naturally went with Blade. Even though Scene was also a human, he believed in Blade, not to mention that Scene was hanging out with Nissa. Looking at the empty hall, Nisha raised her head and looked at Scene and asked, "Do you know Nomic?" She thought of Nomic's salute to Scene just now, when we met. I originally planned to just get rid of him, but I didn't expect that there were so many things involved. He begged me to give him a chance for revenge. Anyway, the person who died in the end was either a vampire or a mutant, so yes. Scene explained. Hearing Scene take their vampires so seriously, Nissa still felt a little uncomfortable, even though she knew he was talking about her father's men, but she also knew that now everything about her belonged to this man, who she gave her own blood contract in the first place. Thinking of the blood contract, Nissa thought of the strange feeling caused by the blood contract for no reason. Pooh. This stinky gangster. Scene watched Nisha's expression change inexplicably. He really didn't expect that Nisha would have so many inner dramas in such a short period of time. A slightly impatient Ellie Damascus came to his medieval style living room, where there was an elevator that led directly to the helipad he had prepared outside. Reinhardt loaded the bullet as he walked and followed Ellie Damascus with the gun in hand to prevent Scene, Blade or Nomic from suddenly rushing out. When the two finally came out of the elevator, all the gates in the hall next to the tarmac suddenly began to close, blocking their last escape route. "Master?" What should we do now? Reinhardt asked. Ellie Damaskinus looked at the closed gate. In this old castle, only Nasa could do this except him. Damn. Little bitch. Ellie Damaskinus cursed in a low voice. Oh. Who are you scolding, little bitch? Reinhardt, who heard the voice, turned around and looked at the haunting old black man. I originally wanted to spare your life, but I didn't expect that you actually showed up at the door yourself. Reinhardt smiled evilly and tilted his head to look at Dao Feng, who was walking over with his hands behind his back. With a click, he loaded the spray gun in his hand, and Reinhardt thought again, that his 2.5 years of practice must have a perfect result. He raised his eyebrows and decided to use a spike to hold the blade in place, slowly enjoying the pleasure of killing him. Drip, 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 just as Reinhardt was taking aim. A familiar mechanical sound suddenly sounded. Reinhardt instantly thought of the useless bomb on the back of his head, and he was about to raise his hand to touch it. If it were me, I wouldn't do that. Blade took out his right hand behind his back, which was the remote control that the dead Scud said was useless. Don't try to bluff me. That thing is useless at all. Lennart yelled sternly. You don't believe it? How about we give it a try? Blade flicked the switch, and the bomb's beeping alarm suddenly became more urgent. Reinhardt's body suddenly trembled, but when he thought that the bomb was made of Scud, and that nothing happened when Blade pressed the detonator before, his tense body relaxed again. HMPH. You want to lie to me? Reinhardt quickly reached for the back of his head. He planned to take off the crap hanging on the back of his head, and then make a good blade. Oh. It's hard to persuade the damn ghost. Seeing Reinhardt reaching out to take down the bomb, Dao Feng could only press the button of the remote control in his hand. With a long beep, Reinhardt's expression suddenly changed, and the hand that was picking up the bomb froze in midair. Oh. Shit. Sanaufubi. Bang. After a loud bang, the remains of Reinhardt, which was blown into pieces, were burned to ashes under the corrosion of the silver and garlic compounds in the bomb. Ellie Damaskinus watched his last men being killed by Blade, and his demonic face did not show any regret or worry. The next one is you. Blade looked at the weak vampire emperor in front of him confidently. Hehe. Ellie Damaskinus did not beg for mercy, but laughed harshly. I don't know how long I haven't moved my body. I didn't expect Reinhardt to be such a waste. Ellie Damaskinus waved his sleeves in disdain. In that case, I'll play with you. Blade looked at Ellie Damaskinus, who was talking in confusion. He didn't know whether this old guy was really weak or fake, but he had confidence in himself. One step forward, Blade planned to defeat the enemy with one move and quickly get rid of this old monster crack. Ugh. Blade, whose throat was locked for just a moment, was immediately pierced into the jaw by Ellie Damaskinus's sharp nails. How is this possible? Blade thought in disbelief. This old monster has not been in hibernation for so long. Shouldn't it be weak? Hehe. Daywalker, you didn't expect it. Ellie Damaskinus smiled triumphantly. If he hadn't wanted to study the secrets of Blade, his sharp nails would have pierced Blade's neck. Ah, indeed. I didn't expect, but did you forget something? Struggling to speak a complete sentence, Blade looked at Ellie Damaskinus jokingly, who looked like he was sure of victory. Chapter 72. Wherever dad goes, I go. Ellie Damaskinus, who was reminded by Blade's words, instantly thought of his runaway son. When he turned his head to look in the direction of the elevator, it was too late. A strong wind blew, and Ellie Damaskinus was immediately rushed out by his big son Normac. Having played the role of "Where are we going, Dad?" for so long, Normac missed his father deeply. Suppressing Ellie Damaskinus's hands that wanted to struggle, Normac approached his sweaty father like a pervert. Sniffer. Father, this familiar smell. Are you afraid? Father. Normac's chin was covered with blood, and his strange pupils looked at Ellie Damaskinus, who was hiding from him with his head tilted. You damn guy, let me go. Ellie Damaskinus tried to push Normac off, who was stepping on him, but it was useless. Father, open your eyes and look at your work, Normac said, shaking his head. You didn't volunteer to participate at the beginning. Ellie Damaskinus tried to shirk responsibility. Ha ha ha. Voluntary participation? You locked your whole body, couldn't speak, couldn't hear, couldn't see, and called it voluntary participation? Normac's face was full of contempt. That's all for the future of our clan. For the future of our vampires, this is a necessary sacrifice. What's more, I'm your father. Ellie Damaskinus said shamelessly. Father? I begged you like that at the beginning, and you, my father, do such a cruel thing to your own son, so, what? I gave you life. Ellie Damaskinus said without regret. Seeing Ellie Damaskinus, who was pressed under him and making a strong argument, Nomak didn't want to talk nonsense with him anymore. He opened his jaws and stretched out his mouth parts to bite Ellie Damaskinus' neck. Ha ha ha. Nomak got his revenge and howled with joy from the bottom of his heart. Here, Whistler suddenly appeared like a ghost, appeared next to Blade, and handed over the weapon. Blade looked at Whistler in surprise. The old man was really good. He actually went to find the weapon for him without saying a word. Although he is very miserable, you must not forget what we do. Whistler looked at Nomak. Blade knew what Whistler was talking about. He drew out the silver sword and walked towards Nomak. Nomak turned his face with his jaw open and looked at Blade. There must be a battle between them. Even if he wanted to truce, Blade would not let him go. Just as the two began to fight, Scene took Nisha down from the elevator. Whistler looked at the two nervously. He was afraid that Scene and Nisha would help Nomak because of their blood relationship. Scene smiled at the old man. Although he was a bit stubborn and too cruel, he was firm in his position and Scene had a good impression of him. Then Nisha walked towards Ellie Damaskinus, who was lying on the ground. Nisha. Save me, Nisha. Ellie Damaskinus, who was desperate to die, saw his baby daughter coming over and rekindled his hope for life. After Nisha slowly approached him, Ellie Damaskinus suddenly raised his hand and drew strange symbols in the void, and his mouth was intermittently reciting an incomprehensible language. Along with his movements and voices, a bright red and round gem gathered out of thin air on his monster-like hand. The gem glowed with a strange red light. Nisha looked at Ellie Damaskinus' actions strangely, and the whole person seemed to be frozen. Scene on the side saw something. Ellie Damaskinus had just casted dark magic, similar to the blood contract that Nisha had given him before, except that the magic had different effects and effectiveness. It was dark magic again. Scene stretched out his hand and waved it, and the dark magic in the air was immediately crushed and dissipated by a mighty tyrannical force. No. Ellie Damaskinus saw that the blood bead in his hand had lost its light, and he screamed hoarsely. Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. His magic would be completed, and then the blood bead would carry all of Ellie Damaskinus' spirit into Nisha's body and lie dormant. Relying on Nisha's flesh and blood energy, Ellie Damaskinus would be reborn from Nisha in the near future. But now everything was broken by Scene. Ellie Damaskinus didn't expect that Scene could actually use magic, and that he could crush his dark magic that he had accumulated for half a day with just one blow. Ellie Damaskinus looked at Scene angrily, panting unwillingly, and suddenly he couldn't breathe. Oh, it was over. What happened just now? Nisha, who had come to her senses, seemed to have been possessed by her soul, and had no idea what had happened. Your father must have used some dark magic to confuse your mind and take over your body. Although Scene's guess was not completely correct, it was almost right. Hearing this, Nisha looked at her dead father on the ground in disbelief. She didn't expect that the only blood relationship she had left was still used by her cold-blooded father at the last moment. Nisha closed her eyes and stopped looking at the corpse on the ground. She walked obediently to stand next to Scene. At this moment, Blade and Nomak were fighting fiercely. Blade clamped Normak's arm and twisted Normak's arm from the joint immediately. Normak screamed. However, under Normak's strong recovery ability, the deformed arm returned to its original position immediately. However, this short time has given Blade a chance. He grabbed the long sword blade that was broken from the middle by Normak and recalled the mutant corpse that Nisha dissected before. Blade held the blade with his bare hands and inserted it diagonally from Normak's armpit. Normak was stabbed in the vitals, and he was in great pain. He recovered his hands and sent Blade flying. It's so strange. I feel the pain seems to disappear. Normak fell to the ground with limp body. Ever since he was experimented on by his father, his body has been craving for blood. This desire is many times stronger than when he was a vampire. As long as he stops eating for a while, the desire will crawl all over his body like a worm. crawling in and out of his bones, but with the sword piercing in, he seemed to be free. Namek looked back at Ellie Damaskinus on the ground. A satisfied smile appeared on his face, and then he reached out and pushed the blade that was not completely inserted into the heart point with his jaw opened, and a low roar. Namek stopped twitching. Seeing her father and brother die in front of her one after another, Nisha couldn't help but lean towards Scene. Scene reached out and hugged his little maid, gently caressing and comforting her. Something's wrong. Scene looked at Ellie Damaskinus, who was already cold. The dead body was suddenly shrouded by a strong scarlet light. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 73 Common Language. WTF, is this a resurrection? I've never heard of a vampire resurrecting. Blade and Whistler felt nervous when they heard the laugh. That was definitely from a villain. Scene frowned and pulled Nissa behind him. He didn't feel Ellie Damaskinus as the scarlet breath gradually dissipated. What they saw was not the ugly appearance of Ellie Damaskinus. A humanoid creature wearing a red cloak and dark red skin slowly fell from the air. Why is it a humanoid creature? Because this guy has a pair of hooked horns on his forehead. However, after it landed, the pair of grey horns slowly turned into grey hair, and the red cloak behind him also turned into a red dress. Thorn. Come and meet your great master Zithorn. Hearing the 3 words Zithorn, Scene probably knew who this guy was, but he didn't understand what he said before. Hello. Cut oil spiking Liz? Scene tilted his head and looked at the legendary ancient demon god. Didn't they say that this guy can't enter the earth? Ancient One, you big skin swallow. RQIU the ancient one, who was far away in Kamataj, suddenly sneezed. Could it be that the demon god from some dimension came to collect the debt? Ancient One touched his nose. Thinking of her butt of debts, she shook her bald head. These days, the one who owes money is the uncle. Who cares? Continue to close your eyes and meditate. He, weak human, who gave you the courage to talk to the great Zithorn like this? Zithorn looked at Scene with interest. 2 of the 4 people present were creations of his dark magic, and the remaining 2 were humans. The reason why he was able to come to Earth was because Ellie Damaskinus used his dark magic, and Zithorn sensed his power. It happened that Ellie Damaskinus died again, which gave Zithorn the opportunity to come to Earth through the remains of Ellie Damaskinus. Those who can use dark magic are basically his admirers or followers. So he said that sentence when he came. However, what Zithorn didn't expect was that there was a human being at the scene who dared to be so rude to him. Sure enough, the universal language of Marvel is English. Scene complained in his heart. Blade walked to Whistler's side. He felt that this monster transformed from Ellie Damaskinus was very powerful. Who is he? What is Zithorn? Blade stared at Zithorn, and he felt a repressive force from his blood. A fallen ancient demon god who has always wanted to return to Earth. Scene explained. So, he succeeded? Blade asked in surprise. It was not good news that a thing called demon suddenly appeared. It shouldn't be. He is very weak now, far from the legend. Scene shook his head indifferently. Nisha looked at her master in shock. Perhaps because her bloodline was more ancient, she could feel the strong suppression from her bloodline more than Blade. Didn't she care about Scene? What was her master's identity? Nisha was very curious. Ha ha ha. This is the funniest joke I have ever heard in my long life. Zissung on the opposite side obviously heard what Scene just said. Human, you are very interesting. I allow you to be my first human slave. Kneel down and thank the great Zissung for the gift. He raised his hand gracefully and gestured to the floor in front of him. Zissung had a happy smile on his face. Well, how about this? I allow you to be my first demon slave. Come and kneel down and kiss your master's feet. Scene raised his foot and tapped on the floor, making a dog-like sound. Huh. Zithorn sneered. It seems that I have been away from the earth for too long, and no one remembers Zithorn's power anymore. Zithorn raised his hand and a scarlet light shot towards Scene. He decided to kill this disrespectful human to make an example of him. But the scene of Scene being torn into pieces that Zithorn imagined did not appear after the scarlet light approached Scene. It began to disperse, and it looked as if it was blocked by something. Then the scattered scarlet breath began to fade until it disappeared completely. Zithorn, who failed to hit him, frowned. He felt that the human in front of him had a familiar feeling, very much like a bald old man who had been stealing things from him in recent years. Thinking of that bald old man, Zison cursed in his heart. After solving the problem here, he must go to settle accounts with her. Akioguyi, who closed his eyes and meditated, rubbed his nose again. It seems that he has a cold. He will put on more clothes later. After Scene resolved Zison's attack, he stretched out his right hand and grasped it. The long-handled 3-pointed two-edged sword immediately appeared in his hand point with a slight force on his feet. The floor showed cracks extending like a spider web. Zeng. The next second Scene's figure appeared behind Zison. The tip of the 3-pointed two-edged sword was shining coldly. Scene just used it to cut off Zison's neck without a drop of blood. Scene stood up, turned his right arm, and held the 3-pointed two-edged sword diagonally, and turned around to look at Zison. Hahaha, such an attack is useless to me. I'm immortal. Ugh. Sithone was mocking Scene's attack as useless. This physical attack could cause little damage to him. But before he finished speaking, the moment he turned around, the wound that should have healed quickly suddenly began to burn. Sithone's head fell to the ground, his limbs waving randomly, and the golden red flames continued to spread downward from the wound on his neck. Ah. This is just a wisp of my clone. When I reign on Earth again, I will definitely let you feel the power of the great Sithone. The head lying on the ground did not wait for the golden red flame to burn him out. After saying this, the scarlet light began to emerge again. The light gradually gathered in the air, and with a pop, it disappeared as if it was shattered by something. I will definitely come back. Hearing Sithone's last words, Scene shook his hand and put away the 3-pointed double-edged sword. Sithorn. Now it should be Elite Damascus. After Sithorn left, the body returned to its original state. Elite Damascus's body has been burned clean by the eternal fire. I said he was weak. Scene looked at Nisha and the other two who were stunned, and spread his hands. Chapter 74, The Will of Steel, The Man of Steel. You, who are you? Blade felt that his brain was a bit out of use. He had always been hunting vampires as his own duty, but the devil and the like were really beyond his ability. Not to mention anything else. He couldn't block Sithorn's casual attack just now. Although the attack was not directed at him, he could still feel the power contained in the scarlet light. But such a powerful demon was actually killed by Scene with one knife. Speaking of which, where is his breathtaking sword? Why did he appear and disappear again all of a sudden? This is my master, His Excellency Scene Hunter. Nissa introduced Scene's identity with full pride on her face, confidently claiming to be Scene's slave. So, you are also a vampire? Whistler was a bit numb. If he beat a vampire, he would still have the confidence to die with them, but Scene's strength was too strong, leaving him with no hope. I'm not. After saying this, Scene raised his head to Nissa, motioning for her to handle it on her own, and then turned around and ignored her. Let's go. Nissa looked at Blade and Whistler, and said generously. Hearing that Nissa was about to let them go, Blade frowned in confusion, and Whistler directly felt that he was hallucinating. Although we have always been hostile, you saved me in our previous cooperation. This time I will return the favor to you, Nisha explained. We are still enemies. Even if you let us go this time, nothing will change, Whistler said rudely. He didn't want to accept the vampire's favor at all. Nisha smiled confidently. Then let's just rely on our own abilities from now on. After that, Whistler pulled the blade and left the vampire's castle. With Scene's help, Nissa successfully took over this huge empire that was in charge of half of the vampires in Europe. Looking at the various people who came to meet him, Nissa, who was sitting on the throne of darkness, lazily raised her hand. Damn it. Didn't she just wear a special queen-style dress yesterday and ask him to give her some advice? She was so violent that she almost didn't have the strength to move. Thinking of the overwhelming feeling from yesterday, Nissa felt both anticipation and fear in her heart. She gently moved her pert little buttocks, and she felt her body became softer. He glanced at the female vampire standing aside. She had drunk several times the amount of blood today, and had not yet replenished the body fluids she had sprayed out yesterday. And Scene, who was cursed by Nisha in her heart, appeared again in the cafe where he first came. He left Natasha's contact information for Nissa, saying that Natasha would discuss vampire matters with her on behalf of S.H.I.E.L.D. Scene's behavior made Nissa dissatisfied. Fortunately, Nissa had the blood contract in hand, Scene just fiddled with it casually and let Nisha perform a good show in front of him. Then Nisha, no longer dared to have any dissatisfaction. She blushed from head to toe as soon as she saw Scene. It was really that Nisha was too unrestrained during the performance, with all kinds of touching movements and words, especially Zaro. Even with his steely will, N couldn't resist and joined in. Scene drank coffee. It didn't rain tonight. Ding-ling-ling. The wind chime on the door of the cafe rang, and a dashing black figure stepped in. Scene retracted his gaze from the window and looked at the little leather-clad kid with a smile, who liked to go out in a vacuum. Probably the eldest sister. Is something wrong? Selena didn't say anything. She sneaked out tonight. After she and Scene separated last time, she returned to their vampire station with the werewolf's new weapon. When she opened the door of the castle, she saw a scene of drunkenness and dreams, with all kinds of revealing low-cut dresses, long black stockings, and white flesh exposed. Sure enough, a long life will make people corrupt. It's a pity that the current acting vampire leader Craven doesn't believe the information Selena brought back at all. This noble and elegant looking man has been coveting Selena for a long time. In his long life, he has seen all kinds of women, but with Selena's unique and cold temperament, coupled with her clan's title of Moonlight Goddess, and the buff bonus of her Death Walker status, Craven was simply scratching his head to get her. Unfortunately, Selena only has werewolf hunting in her heart, turning a blind eye to Craven's various overtures, and now she has even begun to be irritated with him. Because these days happen to be a once-in-a-century alternation of power. Emilia, the vampire leader of this century, is about to arrive to awaken Marcus, the leader of the next century. So Craven wanted to have Selena stand by his side when the Emilia messenger and Emilia arrived, so that he could possess her in name first. Craven ordered Selena to be disqualified from the operation, which made Selena very angry. She returned to the room and checked the video of the werewolf hunt. Then she discovered that the werewolf's target was the human Mike Coven. Sneaked out of the castle secretly. Originally, she was going to look for the human being that the werewolf was chasing, but while driving, she accidentally came around the subway station, where she first met Scene, and she saw Scene sitting in the cafe at first sight. Selena immediately stopped the car and walked into the cafe with black leather boots. Even she didn't know why she came in. Why don't you talk? Scene looked at the cool leather-clad chick with a smile on his face. What do you mean? I want HMM. Selena was too embarrassed to speak. She wanted to ask Scene for help, but why? They had only met once so far, and Scene was not from their vampire clan. I want to ask you for help. Why? Scene didn't ask what he wanted to help with. Anyway, no matter what he wanted to help with, it was not a big deal for him. Sure enough, Selena's heart darkened when she heard Scene's question. This was the first time someone had done this to her. In the past, no matter who she said this to, the other party would basically agree. What can you do to attract me? Scene looked Selena up and down. Scene's eyes made Selena feel like she was being seen naked. She twisted her beautiful body in a tight leather jacket uneasily to try to avoid Scene's gaze, but strangely, Selena didn't hate this feeling. In the past, when those bastards in their tribe looked at her with greedy eyes, she always felt uncomfortable and wanted to rush up to break the legs of those guys and dig out their dirty eyes. Anyway, vampires will recover in the end. But today, when Scene looked at her like this, she only felt shy inside, but also had a faint feeling of anticipation. What can I do, sister? I haven't said anything yet. Scene was stunned. He didn't expect Selena to suddenly do this to him. As long as you are willing to help me, anything can be. Chapter 75 Ancient Legend. Anything is fine. You use this to test the carders. Looking at Selena's pink cheeks and evasive eyes, Scene said that he was sorry to the organization and the people, and he did not stand the test. He also saw the beautiful scenery under Selena's tight leather jacket. His throat was a little dry, and Scene felt that he seemed to be a little angry. The main reason was that Selena gave him a huge contrast. When they first met, the calm and composed man with 2 guns in his hands had the momentum of having everything in the world and was matched with a cool one-piece leather jacket and black windbreaker. Okay, after Thinking about it, he had to solve the problem of vampires here anyway, so Scene agreed directly. Selena looked at Scene with some surprise when she heard this. He knew how powerful Scene was, with his mysterious speed, skin that was difficult to be injured by bullets, and his terrifying sword point. With Scene's help, she would definitely be able to dig out the secrets of the werewolves and catch them all in one fell swoop. Selena has a tough personality, otherwise she wouldn't hate those useless people in the tribe who only know how to enjoy themselves, especially Craven. Compared with the powerful and handsome Scene in front of her, there is a world of difference. Thinking of the reason why she has been hunting werewolves for so long as Scene can help her get revenge, she is really willing to do anything for Scene. Then, can we set off now? Selena was a little anxious. She came out to find the human target that the werewolf was chasing. She was a little afraid that the werewolf would get there first. Scene nodded without comment. After paying the bill, the two drove out of the cafe to Mike Coven's address. Selena's worries were indeed not unreasonable. After arriving, the two found the traces of the werewolf. Is it still a step too late? After getting off the car, Selena anxiously wanted to run into the building, but was stopped by Scene. There's an ambush in the building. Let me do it. The two walked in the corridor. Selena followed him, and Scene frowned in disgust. He smelled the stench of the werewolves. Can't they just take a shower? This group of werewolves didn't get sick, thanks to their extraordinary physique. Before the two of them even reached the elevator, several werewolves that had transformed were crawling towards them. Scene kicked the husky one by one, and was too lazy to do it. It was too dirty. Ding. The elevator went up to the designated floor. And the moment the iron door opened, the four eyes met. It you? Help me call the police. Mike, who was grabbed by Luckian's neck, recognized Scene at the first sight. Scene's appearance and temperament were really impressive. Mike didn't know that the police were also looking for him. He just wanted to get away from Luckian. This guy was a lunatic. He rushed into his apartment, beat him up without saying a word, and then wanted to take him away. Werewolves have a keen sense of smell, and Selena, the Death Walker, is so famous that Luckian recognized her at a glance. Seeing that there were two people on the opposite side, Luckian knew that it would not be so easy to take Mike away today. He made a decision in an instant and immediately changed his plan. His pupils began to grow larger and grayer, and sharp fangs appeared in his mouth, wanting to bite Mike. Snap. Just as Luckian opened his mouth, Scene stretched out his hand and hit Luckian with a big bag, hitting him horizontally and hitting the wall of the corridor. Mike, who was caught by Luckian, was also brought to the ground by Luckian. He was about to get up, but he was greeted by Selena's cold gun muzzle. No, 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 please. Looking at the black muzzle of the gun, Mike immediately raised his hands and begged for mercy from this beautiful goddess. Selena looked at Mike with contempt, and she was even more confused in her heart. Why did the werewolf catch such a useless human being? It should be said that Luckian's body is much stronger than that of ordinary werewolves. Scene's slap made his left face dented, and the left fangs broke and flew everywhere, but he still struggled to get up. Scene stretched out his foot to step on Luckian's body, and Luckian immediately felt as if a mountain was pressing on him. With a clang, a long sword came out of Luckian's right sleeve and chopped Scene's leg. But what he didn't expect was that the sharp long sword broke directly in the middle, and Scene's calf and trouser legs were not damaged at all. Luckian immediately became honest. He knew that Scene's strength was too strong and was not at the same level as him. If he continued to anger Scene, he would only die faster. Looking at Luckian, who spread his hands to surrender, Scene did not kill him again. He had to leave him alive for questioning. Why did you arrest him? Selena asked coldly as she looked at Luckian, who was being stepped on by Scene and was obedient. Luckian was different from his werewolf subordinates. He was very smart, and he found out that Scene was not a vampire. After a brief thought, he told the truth. I want to explore a secret in him, a secret that has been hidden for many years and is closely related to our two tribes. In ancient legends, werewolves and vampires have a common ancestor. Alexander Corvinus, it is said that he had 3 sons, 2 of whom, William, became the ancestor of werewolves after being bitten by wolves, and Marcus became the ancestor of vampires after being bitten by bats. The only remaining human bloodline has been passed down from generation to generation to this day point. The blood of werewolves and vampires is as poisonous to each other as it is. Whether a werewolf bites a vampire or a vampire bites a werewolf, they will surely die point. But Luckian believes that the authentic bloodline from Alexander Corvinus has the power to neutralize the toxicity of the blood of both. So he has been looking for the descendant of the third son point after continuous searching and a series of eliminations. Luckian's only remaining target is Mike Coven point, as long as nothing unexpected happens. Mike Coven is undoubtedly the descendant of the third son point. He is now coming to capture him to verify his bloodline point. Selena couldn't listen to the first half, but she didn't interrupt when she saw Scene listening intently point. This legend is also circulated among vampires, but now the vampire community is forbidden to trace their origins, so they treat this more as a story point. Mike, who was pointed at by Selena's gun, was stunned. What, werewolves and vampires? He just wanted to leave safely now. How do you prove that what you said is true? Scene asked point. Seeing Scene's interest, Luckian felt that he could live longer, so he told another story from hundreds of years ago point. At that time, he was still a werewolf slave, but he fell in love with Sonia, the daughter of the vampire Lord Victor. Soon Sonia was pregnant with the fruit of their love, a baby with mixed werewolf and vampire blood, but at the same time, their relationship was discovered by Victor under Victor's ruthless and cold-blooded order. He exposed his own daughter to the sun and burned her alive, and Luckian was tied aside and watched his lover and child die tragically in front of him. Shut up, you liar. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.